OTB AM.
With Gillette, put your best face forward with our new and improved razors.
And a very good morning to you. Welcome along to OTB AM. It is Tuesday, the 16th of March, so the day before Patrick's Day. What are you doing for St. Patrick's Day this year? On what massive festival of cans and parties are you having?
I'm coming on OTB AM. So if that's a festival of cans and partying, I'm all for it. If we want to do OTB AM after 4 cans at 7:30 in the morning, I am all for it. If you're up for it, I'm up for it.
Okay. I mean, I'll be in studio and I'd have to drive home, but sure, there'll be no cops out on... I mean, look, I better wind back that joke before the YouTube commenters are think I'm mildly serious about it. But yeah, maybe I'll just do it from home and have the 4 cans.
Absolutely. Was it this time last year when lockdown was this fresh new thing? A crappy quiz round was to pour a can of Guinness, and whoever poured it the best got the point. Let's just reprise that. And if anybody at home wants to join us, put Guinness in your porridge or whatever it may be. We're up for it. A
little bit of Bailey's in the porridge. I think it's a bit of extra class on St. Patrick's Day. Let's move on quickly. Ireland are playing England in the rugby this weekend. It's on St. Patrick's weekend. It has become something pretty good for us in the past. There have been some sensational St. Patrick's weekends where Ireland have beaten England, stuffed it to them at Twickenham a couple of separate occasions as well. This time, with the news that came out yesterday about the injuries, Ringrose is injured, and I think more importantly in terms of the form and how we will cope, and also all the stuff coming out about how James Ryan has really taken on the intellectual challenge posed by Paul O'Connell. The fact that James Ryan is out, is it disastrous for our hopes this weekend?
It's not great, that's for sure. It does give them an opportunity to try something else out in the second row. Ian Henderson has been playing very well, so it's who you partner with him. Is it going to be Tyke Byrne back to the second row and then Peter O'Mahony comes back into the back row? Because that ain't a bad situation to be in if that's what you can do. Somebody making the point that maybe Peter O'Mahony doesn't automatically get back into the team because of what happened against Wales. Maybe that changes now when James Ryan is out, and automatically he does get back in the team straight away at the first time of asking. I think there is a bit of depth there for sure that Ireland can boast about. James Ryan, though, he is getting to that stage now where he's getting close to Paul O'Connell level of, if you lose him, there just isn't a player in Ireland's setup that is on a level with him at all. So once he gets injured, there is a drop-off. With Gary Ringrose, there's maybe a bit of an opportunity for Ireland to just try something differently and actually have a better outcome. We've got powerful midfielders in Bundy Aki and Chris Farrell. Personally, Chris Farrell, I think, has been fantastic every time I've watched him. He does sometimes feel like a bit of a luxury, or maybe that's what the case is, because he doesn't get picked as much as the other 3, I actually think, and that's what we've seen over the last couple of years. But maybe this weekend is different. Maybe this weekend Andy Farrell is thinking, let's try something with a bit more power. Let's try somebody who is an unbelievable ball carrier, and let's try something different against the English, because they have beaten Ireland comfortably the last 3 or 4 occasions.
Ringrose looked relatively low on confidence, I would have said, at the weekend, or certainly it was not a performance at the level that we were used to seeing. There was the mistake for the try. There was a few other bits and pieces around as well where it was just not quite on the wavelength that they need to be if we're going to have a highly functioning attack. I mean, I presume Mike Catt has a strong say about who he wants to implement his plan and where that direction goes is going to be very interesting to see, because you wouldn't say any of the available centres are like for like. And that was certainly one of the conversations that we had yesterday with Alan Quillen about maybe you bring in Farrell and you would stick Ringrose on the wing anyway, because you're trying to get your best team out there, and Ringrose is an excellent defender, and would have been very interesting to see that experiment. It's not going to happen. There are always going to be injuries, obviously, in international rugby, so how the team copes with that. Does this have any impact now on whether or not James Lowe gets in the team, do you think?
Well, that's an interesting one, because I guess the relationship between all those Leinster backs is something that's been spoken about quite a bit over the last few weeks, and there is a reason why they all wear the blue of Leinster, and they all got picked in that Italy game, for example, because they know each other. Does this then make Lowe even more of a liability in defensive if Gary Ringrose isn't beside him? Is one way you could ask that question. That would be the only knock-on impact. I'm
thinking from an attacking perspective. All of a sudden, you're missing Ringrose. Do you also want to be missing the attacking threat that you have with James Lowe? The James Lowe conversation is very, right now he's missed a tackle, but we are trying to build a team that beats South Africa. So do you fix his tackling, thinking that he is our most potent attacking threat, or do you say we can't fix your tackling and so therefore we're not going to have all the benefits of having your big left boot when we need it, of having your power when we need it? Because he's definitely the most powerful of those wingers. And look, I mean, Stockdale had fairly similar issues around. Felipe Contepomi is doing the, well, yeah, you guys are all giving out about James Lowe, but what about Stockdale? I saw you all picking on him one time, which is, a brilliant, interesting piece of whataboutery from a rugby coach that I find it hard to disagree with, to be honest. Like, everybody, all of the available wingers have issues. So what do? Do you keep throwing them out and burning their confidence and throw them out and burn their confidence? Or do you stick with one of them and say, yeah, your tackling's terrible. You need to fix that. And here's the 5 hours this week that we're going to spend on that technique so that the next time that happens, you smash him around the midriff.
Yeah, Contepomi, in fairness, did say that James Lowe is not renowned for his defensive attributes. He also did say that yesterday, that he's more renowned for ball in hand moving forward. Like, the question is, are we getting enough from James Lowe? Are we seeing enough when it comes to his ball in hand moving forward? Like, maybe not, and maybe there needs to be a question about how James Lowe is activated more when it comes to Ireland's attack over the next little while, because the trade-off at the moment, I would imagine a lot of people are saying, well, it's not necessarily worth it. Is Andrew Conway actually going to give you as much as James Lowe is on an attacking level at the moment? The answer is probably yes. However, if there are a few tweaks to the game, then the full version of James Lowe at his, swashbuckling best that we've seen for Leinster over the past couple of years, maybe we can see that for Ireland as well. So I think there's two sides to this coin a little bit, and I don't think anybody's writing off James Lowe's international career here whatsoever. It's about winning a game against England.
A lot of people are saying drop him now and that's it. He can never make it back again. Like, how do you ever recover from this? And the thing is, how do you recover from it if you don't get back in the team? Like, if the decision is made, so say there's a Jack Carty-esque decision being made or thought of in the selection process, how does Jack Carty ever get back? He's not getting back, is he? Like, that's the point. Yeah. Is Cooney getting back? It doesn't look like it at this stage. There's a number of those players who international rugby cycles through and decides, right, that's it, you've had your window. But like in many of those cases, it's not black and white. It's a system issue. Like, from an attacking perspective, we didn't see that much of Keith Earls last week. It was his defensive play that was brilliant, and also his kick chase and the catch, like a couple of great catches, really made us think that was it. And it was a brilliant performance from Keith Earls. So it's narrow enough margins. You wouldn't have said Keith Earls was unbelievably dynamic with ball in hand last week, because we weren't creating chances for him, and that's a system issue, I would argue. So look, I don't know. Yeah. I think the Lowe thing, the bad tackling, you drop him because of the bad tackling. It's hard to put him back in the team. Maybe on the summer tour he plays 3 games and you spend an awful lot of time on the tackling, and you get him in camp for 5 or 6 weeks in the summer, and then next November. But I just think that they need to be thinking a little bit long term with bringing all these players through. And Stockdale is back and available. Maybe you just pick Stockdale. I don't know. Maybe the thing to do is to just pick Stockdale, because if we are again going to beat South Africa in the World Cup, you need Jacob Stockdale playing at his absolute best.
It's not right, though, is it, that there are Jack Cartys and John Cooney's and those situations that they are cast away so quickly from international rugby. Like, we don't know the full thought process behind maybe not bringing Jack Carty into this year's Six Nations squad, but I think a lot of people would be of the mind that what he did at the World Cup probably doesn't warrant him being out in the cold forever. Same with James Lowe at the moment, and it is bad if James Lowe if he gets dropped for this weekend and subsequently can't make his way back into an Ireland squad. That's not how it should work. Players should get picked on form, and if James Lowe isn't on form at the moment, he should not start this weekend if there are wingers who are in better form than him. But he should then be available for the next camp, and if his form is better for the next camp, then he should be in the Ireland squad for the next game. Like, I would have thought that it's fairly simple that Irish rugby shouldn't hold a grudge against a player for being in bad form.
Yeah, or making mistakes as opposed to even being in bad form and trying to decide, was that just a mistake or is the form bad at the moment, and what are the other markers and indicators saying about that? Look, if anybody wants to get in touch this morning and give us a view on this, you can drop a comment into the YouTube stream, or you can always text us 087 9180 180. It's a WhatsApp number, and you can get in touch with us by that. We've got a really interesting interview a bit later on. And this is very important for everybody out there who are watching this, because we know you're a diehard sports fan if you're watching us at 7:30 every morning on OTB AM. You've spoken to somebody who has scientific proof. It's science, baby. It's science that watching sport on telly, or just watching sport generally, is good for you.
On telly is good, I think. It like better if you're in the stadium or in the ground, but on telly is fine. So we're going to be joined later on by Larry Olmsted, who's a New York Times best-selling author. He has turned his attention from food to sport, and he's got a new book out called Fans: How Watching Sport Makes Us Happier, Healthier, and More Understanding. So the clue is in the title of the book. One little passage I just want to read out this morning. So this isn't just him theorizing how sport makes him happier. There are a lot of personal anecdotes in the story. He has actually gone and looked at the science of it. So a joint global project between a researcher at Temple University and peers in UK and Australia analysed 135 academic and research papers on sports spectators published in the world between 1990 and 2014. They concluded that sports spectating provides numerous benefits. They grouped these into 5 distinct mental health well-being categories. 1, positive emotions. 2, engagement. 3, relationships. 4, meaning. And 5, accomplishment. So if you've spent the last 6 months just watching Premier League football, watching a bit of the GAA and the rugby as well, you have managed to tick all of those 5 boxes. You have looked after yourself. And if somebody tells you this weekend or this midweek during the Champions League or during Cheltenham to get away from the telly, to stop watching the sport, you give them that passage. You are just looking after yourself.
Unless, of course, you're a Liverpool supporting Mayo fan at the moment.
Well, this is the thing. I was like, Kerry getting beaten by Cork last November had a negative emotion on me for a good 4 months, I would say. Like, this thing works both ways. This
I'd
is
say
all...
you're not fixed yet. You're just not right yet, Eoin.
No, I think actually we're just about 4 months away from it, so it's still going on. This is all predicated, I think, on the fact that it's about winning. And if you're watching a sports team, like I'm sure Liverpool fans, for example, thought Lockdown 1 or Lockdown 2 after they won the Premier League was the best thing ever. And then all of a sudden, Lockdown 3 just doesn't seem like Lockdown 2 did. And they may be wondering why that is. Is it stricter measures? Is it the cold? No, it's probably because your team is shite.
It's Godfather syndrome, isn't it? Godfather 1 and 2, great. Godfather 3, not so good. Speaking of which, Phil Egan is with us this morning. Phil, good morning to you at 7:42. You must be the healthiest man in the world with all the TV sport that you're watching.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that I definitely should be showing to my wife and my family. For years, I was told, what are you doing watching that football for years? My mother used to say, and here we are. It's scientific proof that things are better when you watch sport. You try and watch box sets of some stuff and it stresses you out. I started watching Your Honour on Sky Atlantic, and after a couple of episodes, I was just so anxious watching it because I'm not going to spoil anything for anyone, but so much had happened. I just thought, the way this plays out is just going to be really tense. And watching Liverpool games at the moment is not tense, but it's also not a great experience either.
I mean, it was not a bad experience last night, and there was a bit of tension.
Yeah, do you know what? I don't think Liverpool will play worse this season when they win a game. But if you that was only their second win in 8 league games. They've played better in some of those defeats they've suffered in that run. But this is what happens in football. Sometimes you get a win where you probably don't play very well. You got to take these. Jurgen Klopp described it as a 33 points, and that's what they needed. Look, Liverpool are not going to hit the heights that they got to last season or the season before. It's still very strange watching them just give the ball away. The tone was almost set pretty much 2 minutes in when Alisson dropped a routine catch, was lucky enough not to concede a penalty for a foul on Semedo. And as I said, that just set the tone. Thiago had an absolute shocker. Whatever about his tackling, he's usually pretty good with the ball, but he just couldn't find Liverpool players with his passing. He kept giving the ball away, and he obviously got his customary yellow card, so it was no surprise to see him taken off. But yeah, Jota makes a hell of a difference, because if that chance had fallen to Firmino, who he's obviously replacing at the moment, you wouldn't have fancied him to even take the shot on first time.
Vinny Perth is going to join us in a couple of minutes' time, and he's going to talk to us tactically about the evolution of Liverpool this season and what's gone wrong with them. So we'll get into the details on that in a little while. But just from the psychological perspective at the moment, we've seen a couple of back-to-back results about 8 weeks ago. Whenever the 2 London games, was it Spurs and West Ham back to back?
Spurs and West Ham, yeah, the away games, yeah.
We thought, there's a turning point, that that blip is over, but that proved to be a false dawn. There's now another couple of back-to-back results that have gone well in the Leipzig game and this game. Is this a turning point?
I don't think it's a turning point. I don't think it's a coincidence that Fabinho's come back into midfield, and all of a sudden Liverpool are keeping clean sheets. And it's funny, the centre half combination of Nat Phillips and Ozan Kabak, they played 3 times this season together, and they've kept 3 clean sheets in those games. Now, people might point out the opposition, say last night away to Wolves, who aren't the most prolific team, and also Sheffield United are included in that, but obviously Leipzig were there as well. But I thought actually it was probably Kabak's best game for Liverpool. I know Nat Phillips is getting a lot of praise, and he's becoming a bit of a cult hero for Liverpool, and it won't be long before you see a few kids walking down the street with Phillips on the back of their jersey, number 47. But Kabak obviously came into a really tough environment, and he had come from Schalke, where they're having an absolute shocker of a season. He's only 20, and people had written this kid off after a few games. Even before 7 o'clock this morning, I'd already had an argument with a Liverpool fan in this building about Ozan Kabak. You can't just judge him on the first few games. Give the lad a chance. Obviously, Liverpool have an option to buy him at the end of the season. We're not sure if they're going to do that, but he certainly is starting to grow into the role. And I just thought he did things quite simply last night. And there was one situation in particular that stood out where Pedro Neto was running through and Kabak just stuck with him and intercepted him. And actually, watching the analysis after the game, Jamie Carragher did a piece on Nat Phillips and Ozan Kabak, and he just talked about how what Kabak did there with Pedro Neto is he just stayed on his feet. He didn't dive in, and people say, well, that's pretty obvious, but my mind kind of thought back to if that was Day and Lovren, he would have just gone straight in, man, maybe not ball, and you're looking at a red card there. But yeah, there was a few positive signs. I thought Trent Alexander-Arnold was very good defensively as well, and even Oxlade-Chamberlain came on and was very positive with his cameo. But you wonder what kind of future he has at Liverpool.
This is their last game for quite a while now.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've got the Champions League draw to look forward to. So there's a real chance for a reset here. Yeah,
and I think as well, it was important to finish this kind of little run of games with a win. And as you mentioned, they've got that big gap now, the international break. They've no game this weekend because of the FA Cup. But they've got Arsenal away when they come back. And then they've got Villa at home. They still have to go to Old Trafford. They're 5 points off the Champions League places. I don't think they're catching Chelsea. Leicester are 10 points ahead of them. That ain't going to happen either. 9 games to play. They'd have to win. I'd say they'd have to win 8 games to have any chance of finishing in the top 4. And I just can't see it. But I think it's important that they finish the season off well, and then there's no hangover going into next season, and they bring some of their big players back, and there is a reset. And by the sounds of things, there's going to be a little bit of recruitment. There's going to be players leaving. There's going to be players coming in as well.
I can easily see them winning 7 games. They've got Palace, Burnley, Southampton, West Brom, Newcastle. Villa's form is not great, and Leeds. And that leaves them with 2 massive games against Arsenal and Manchester United. Like, it's not beyond the bounds possibility that this team puts a run together. If Henderson's back fit after the international break too, there's a little bit of wiggle room for them. Look, we'll obviously talk about this in a bit more detail as time goes on, and because the international break is nearly upon us, we've plenty of time to talk about that too. A reminder, OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning, start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. What else is going on, Phil?
Well, obviously the big incident in the game, apart from Diogo Jota's goal, was Rui Patricio's injury in the second half. Nasty clash with Conor Cody when Mo Salah had put the ball in there for an offside goal. But the positive news coming out of Wolves pretty much straight after the game was that Patricio was okay and conscious. And that was good to hear. And obviously Champions League action tonight. Manchester City will expect to book their place in the quarterfinals. 2-0 up on Borussia Mönchengladbach, who are in really bad form at the moment. That game is going to be played in Budapest. And probably the one to watch there was Real Madrid and Atalanta. Real are 1-0 up from the first leg. But remember, Atalanta had a player sent off very early on in that game. Real scored a goal and obviously are the favourites for this. But certainly not done and dusted. Real haven't exactly, they're winning games, but haven't been too convincing. Both those games kick off at 8 o'clock. I know you're obviously going to cover the papers in a bit, and one story to look out for is Donny van de Beek. Obviously joined Manchester United last summer, but already reports that he wants to leave after less than a season in the in the club. Lack of game time, obviously joined from Ajax for 40 million. So that's in the back of some of the papers today. The CheltenhamFestival gets underway this afternoon. No famous roar, although what Tom Malone said to us last week, I wonder if they made up the Cheltenham famous roar on the computer to try and replicate what happens on day one at Cheltenham. But obviously no crowds there. The champion hurdle is the feature race. Honeysuckle is the favourite for that one. Epiton, obviously the defending champion. That one gets underway at 3:05. The first is 7 on soft ground, gets underway at 1. The news from the Irish rugby camp yesterday, Gary Ringrose and James Ryan will miss the England game on Saturday. Ringrose suffered an ankle injury against Scotland. Ryan has a head injury and obviously had missed a few games already in the Six Nations with a head injury. So Peter O'Mahony back in the squad. Interested to see if he'll be in the 23 for that game. And I have to mention the Ireland women taking on Great Britain in hockey today, the final and third match of the series in Belfast. Obviously, Ireland beat the Olympic champions on Sunday, so sets things up nicely for the decider at Queen's University at 3:00. And another story that splashed all over the back of the papers today, the most anticipated fight in boxing, one step closer. The contracts have been signed for Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury, and no venue has been finalised, but Saudi Arabia looks like the favourite.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia is the favourite. The London Times this morning reporting that negotiations have yet to get underway about who's going to broadcast the fight, because obviously the two fighters have separate contracts, one with BT and one with Sky. Broadcasters are expected to seek assurances, reports the Times, that Daniel Kinahan, the suspected Irish crime boss Fury originally thanked for negotiating the deal on his behalf last year, is no longer involved. Kinahan, who co-founded the MTK global management company that represents Fury, said recently he continued to arrange the world's biggest fights despite no longer being directly involved with MTK. Fury has been silent on the matter since those comments by Kinahan, who's been named in the Irish courts as the head of £1 billion sterling drugs and arms cartel. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what happens, and we'll keep a very close eye on that and try and filter the details of it. But it looks like a fight in June or July. Yeah,
and it's a fight that I've always wondered who'd win. I mean, personally, I would think Tyson Fury, because he's just a better boxer. I know it's heavyweight boxing, one punch can change everything, but Fury's already negotiated the biggest hitter in the heavyweight division in Deontay Wilder. Obviously, miraculously got up in the 12th round in the first fight, but took care of it in the second fight. So I think if you get the best version of Tyson Fury in terms of what condition he's in going into the fight, then for me, he wins. But who knows?
Yeah. Who knows indeed. It's a two-fight deal as well, so it looks like we're going to have a rematch no matter what happens. Phil, good stuff. Thanks a million.
Cheers, lads.
7:53 this morning. If you want to get in touch, 0879 180 180 is the number. Here's what's coming up between now and 10 o'clock. Vinny Perth is standing by. We're going to talk to him for the next 20 minutes or so about the situation at Liverpool. If you have any other questions for him, good to get them in right now. Matt Williams is going to join us live at 8:20. We're going to speak with Kylie Murphy from Wexford Youths about an innovative new deal that they've done to help finance them. Larry Ormsted, as we've been talking about, has written a book that will justify you sitting on your ass watching TV for the next few months. So we're doing our bit of public service broadcasting this morning. And Keith Wood and Niamh Briggs are going to give us their reaction to what happened at the weekend from 9:30 or so. And now, Vinny Perth, good morning to you. How are you getting on?
Good morning, man. How are we?
Yeah, good. Before we get into the historic analysis, from your perspective, the dirty 3 points for Liverpool last night, how important is it when everything's been going against them that they put back-to-back results, not performances? I almost said performances, but not quite.
Yeah, I think it's important something to build on. The Champions League result during the week, I thought was just very, very good. Last night, as they say, that dirty performance, but at the same time, even at your very best last year, if you're Liverpool, I think you have games like that. So they're part and parcel of football, but I think it's important for psychologically to have a bit of time off now. I think it's nearly 3 weeks, just over 3 weeks, probably before they play again. So that will give them a time to sort of, albeit some players will go away on international duty, but it will give them a little bit of time to build towards that Champions League. I still think the Champions League is probably the best route of playing Champions League football again next year, if that makes sense, if they go and win it. But they're good enough to go on a run that's unbeaten between now and the end of the season if everything goes their way. So they can put pressure on and get back into the top four. But I think we've seen last night some signs of what's been wrong with them this year and how Klopp is trying to fix it. So it was a good result, albeit it wasn't a great performance. So they'll be a lot happier after the week's work that's gone in.
And we did want to go into what has been going wrong for Liverpool over the past few weeks. Vinny, you've done a bit of a deep dive for us this morning into the last 12 months, I think, for Liverpool. I think it's fair to say, from them being really good at the end of last season to them, I guess, falling away at the start of this calendar year. So you're going to take us back here to start to the Liverpool hammering of Palace at the end of last season, in June of last year. And I think you're just going to take us through here how Liverpool's pressing was so unbelievably good at this point and the personnel involved in it.
Yeah, I think what it's called is, and Klopp has used this word, so it's not something that's been labelled at him. I don't like some people being labelled certain coach, but he's used it and he's called the heavy metal football. And effectively, you can go around the house explaining that it's high intensity, it's in your face, he calls it brutal, and it's exciting, but effectively it's real quick counter pressing, getting the ball back as quick as you can. And that's what his teams historically have been built on, Borussia Dortmund, and when you got Liverpool to the very best. I think one of the reasons I started looking into this was sort of as a coach, a worker trying to learn, but also I haven't liked some of the comments that it's been one of the worst, Premiership teams or winning teams of history because of the points fall off has been massive. So we'll try to work out what was behind that. Obviously, injuries definitely plays a part in it, but some of it has been the tactical change by Klopp. And again, there's no doubt that's been forced by injuries, but it's been really fascinating to watch. That Crystal Palace game in particular, I think they won 5-6-0. They were outstanding. That was Liverpool at their very best. And then you watch them over the last few weeks and it's just chalk and cheese. So it was something I just felt was worth looking at. And to see Stratton I can learn from it. And you most certainly do when you dive into it.
So on screen, we've got Mane, Firmino and Salah. I think this is what most people notice, first of all, when they look back at last season. Vinny, just how good that front three is without the ball.
Yeah, so I suppose all the plaudits for pressing, it starts with that front three. And the world class at it. That's where it all starts from. Remember Sky doing a big piece last year and on Mane, I think, closing down one of the goalkeepers, and they scored a result of it. But that only works unless the team and again Klopp has spoken about, he's big into the whole team has to press as a unit, and that front three are brilliant at it. But what is starting to happen is, and we'd see it as we go on later on, is that they've lost the will to do it a little bit, because what's behind them, there's no doubt their own form has dipped off with the players, but as a result they're letting teams out too easily now. But last year, that was phenomenal. But what was behind it was even better, but just ironically didn't get the plaudits for it, because we always talk about strikers first and foremost.
So behind it, obviously, was your first choice midfield of Wijnaldum, Fabinho and Henderson. Yeah,
absolutely. And when everybody is fit last year, generally they had the odd niggle last season, but by and large it was that three in all of the big games. Fabinho would sit as a number 6, and what I'm showing here is you can clearly see the front three are ready to press, but actually the one that's ready to go first is Wijnaldum. But what's interesting is Fabinho is in also, so we call it in football the number 6 or the defensive midfielder. He's ready to press as well, and then Henderson is coming in after it, and they really choked the life out of teams. In this game against Palace ended up forcing just kicking it long. Van Dijk and Gomez, who were quite quick, picked up everything. And Liverpool went again and again. And ultimately that affects the Palace team, or any team you play against Liverpool, because mentally you're worn out. You're giving the ball back to Liverpool and they go again, and it's attack after attack and wave after wave. So that three behind them was instrumental in how they play. The energy levels they have last season was just phenomenal. And again, it wasn't just from a defensive point of view. They turn up in different positions. We remember the great goal when Wijnaldum got the header against Barcelona that got them back into that tie. So they gave them everything. And again, to explain heavy metal or counter press football, if you look at the three here, when they win the ball back, and Pep spoke about it this week in terms of sometimes he slows his team down from a counter press. And the reason for that is when you win a ball back off the opposition and your team flood forward, you're actually vulnerable to them winning it back off you and you conceding. and he spoke about it this week. But in that instance there, that midfield three, just like dogs of war, all of these old football sayings, the intensity they win that ball back. As you see, it's Firmino, but it just comes from the three of them getting after it. It breaks the Salah, and Crystal Palace are on the back foot. And then it's a lot easier for the likes of Salah, Mane, Firmino or Jota at the moment to break down a team like that who think their fullbacks think we're getting out, and then it turns over and Liverpool go and score. And they've lost that intensity this year, as we'll get onto. But that was really crucial to how Liverpool played last year and became one of the best teams in the Premiership of all time as a result of it.
Crucial to that as well, Vinny, just to wrap up on the positives, I guess, from that era almost of Liverpool, is the high backline. And I think an image here is from a Manchester City game.
Yeah, so you're talking about one of the, like, Manchester-Liverpool last season, one of the biggest games in the world. And for all of that to work is you have to have a really high line. And again, there was certain criticism of that, particularly on free kicks. But it won't work because, especially now in the Premiership, you're talking about teams, even Brighton, third, fourth from the bottom, or Southampton, they just bounce ball back around your team. They've got players good enough, even the modern-day goalkeeper. But in this example, they're playing against Man City. There's probably 20 yards of a distance there. A lot of space for City to go in behind. But they're just about, as a midfield, to press the ball. And when Van Dijk and Gomez are in the team, they squeeze the pitch up and basically squeeze the life out of the opposition. And again, that's all designed about winning the ball back. Again, Klopp speaks about, if I had 80% possession, people say, oh, that's great, but I think I should have more. And effectively what he's saying is, I want the ball all of the time. And he drills that into his players. Obviously, fitness levels is huge, but in this clip, you can see it's very, very brave of the team. Again, in one of the biggest games in world football, Liverpool against Man City. So that's where it comes from. That's his philosophy, and that's what probably one of the greatest teams of all time, the Premiership, was built on last season.
Let's move on to this season then, Vinny. And the next image we're going to bring up here, I guess, illustrates the personnel differences in Liverpool's midfield. Why has that made such a big difference?
Well, look, obviously the injuries first and foremost are huge. We all know that in terms of the centre-halves in Van Dijk. But when Van Dijk first went out, Liverpool didn't all of a sudden fall off a cliff. It came gradually. Obviously then Matip went out and Gomez as a result. But bringing Curtis Jones and Thiago into the team, that 2 eights, we call them eights, or attacking midfielders of Henderson and Wijnaldum, the energy levels they gave Liverpool was crucial. And turning up in different areas, as I said, Henderson's crosses in games, first-time crosses, was like Kevin De Bruyne's and would do at City, for argument's sake. But this year, you've got that five of Wijnaldum has had to become the sitter. Klopp did try Thiago there, and it didn't work. You've got Henderson and Fabinho most likely playing centre-half throughout most of the season. And the knock-on effect is just huge. It's like, you can carry, as we seen at times last night, Thiago alongside Wijnaldum and Fabinho, or Curtis Jones, who's a young player, a really exciting player, but he's inconsistent. Sometimes he's best player on the pitch, sometimes Klopp takes him off early, but they don't have that heavy metal football, that intensity, that running power that the other two guys have in terms of Henderson, Fabinho, Wijnaldum. That is a three. And as I said, I thought that signing Thiago to start the season was really good. But I seen, and the reason it was really good is at certain times you need a player that's going to unlock the door against certain opposition. And Liverpool probably lacked that. That would be the one criticism of last season's team. And it was Klopp evolving, bringing in a passer. But the knock-on effect with the injuries behind him, and it's if you can say, a midfield three, they all are 33.3% of your midfield makeup. When you take 66% of that out of it, the fall off for Liverpool has been colossal.
Naturally, and then obviously the knock-on impact on some of your attackers when it comes to Firmino and his press, when it comes to Salah and his positioning, has been stark as well. And I know we've got a graphic here of how they set up when the opposition are in possession. As you can see on screen there, the opponents are the yellow dots there on screen, Vinny. And I think Firmino here is a player you wanted to focus on.
Yeah, so Firmino, we speak about his link-up play, and he drops in at times to get the ball, but that's in an attacking sense. But from a press sense, he because of Henderson and Wijnaldum last season being that advance, as I showed earlier on, and even Fabinho at times, he was the one that started the press for Liverpool and forced the opposition into either going long or making an error. What he's had to do at times this season, because of the two behind him in, say, Jones or Thiago, is he's had to go into that deep line number 6, belong to the opposition. So it's meant that there's a lot more work for Mane and Salah to press, who are both equally as good as Firmino or aren't far off it. And when the three of them press together, it's massive. And they're not, again, as I said, the knock-on effect for that is strikers, no matter who they are, don't want to be running for too long. They want the ball. They want to be scoring goals, getting in on goal. And I think their patience is weighed thin a little bit throughout the season, and it's dipped the amount of running they're doing. And statistically, that's backed up as well. So it's really affected the team. And if Firmino doesn't go in after that number 6, we've seen teams, Southampton game's a prime example where they just completely outpassed Liverpool's midfield. Everton done it at times in the last couple of weeks. And the loss of that counter press from Liverpool has effectively changed everything about their team and why they struggle so much.
We can see next up as well, that game against Everton that you allude to, how big a factor in that Everton victory was Firmino, and I guess maybe getting stuck between a rock and a hard place without the ball?
Yeah, and I think, look, it's a Merseyside derby. So if you imagine what Klopp would want, he would want his team right at him, making loads of tackles, all of that stuff, pressing the life out of Everton. They have a great record. And listen, there's no doubt the early goal changed the game for Everton. But at the same time, you see in this clip here, Firmino is running after the deep line midfielder for Everton. And the stark difference between that and Crystal Palace, or the way they played last season, is Thiago and Jones are more or less out of the screen. And as I said, the knock-on effect for that is huge for Mane and Salah. They're running after fullbacks because effectively let Everton out too easy. And that's huge. And you see Mane is a full pelt there running back towards his goal. That has to happen at different stages, but that was happening too much throughout the season. And you just become, it was so easy for Everton to pick out a pass or go back through their goalkeeper and just have easy possession. And that is not what made Liverpool the greatest team, or one of the greatest teams last season, and it was huge. And I think I moved on. The next clip after that shows a prime example where Fabinho goes and takes a chance and closes the goalkeeper or the centre half down, and the support behind them is just really, really poor because Everton are it's so easy for Everton just to get out with one simple pass. And I think that's been replicated throughout the season at different stages or over the last couple of months. If you look at Everton's deep line midfielder there, he's just got the freedom of the park. There's no way with Wijnaldum, Henderson, Fabinho in the team that would happen. That would, I would say, on a video analysis session by Klopp, that would drive him demented. It would drive him mad. But that is, I mean, that's a massive a change of how they play or people in the team. It's easy to say, well, make the other lads run more, but it's not a natural game. Curtis Jones has got energy. He can press. Thiago can press, but he certainly hasn't got the same running power that the other two would have, and it's been huge. And I think
that's really interesting
as well. As a result, when you look at the statistics of the amount of times Liverpool pressed the ball between last season and this season, the fall off has been dramatic.
Just on that, the type of midfielder that you mentioned there that is letting them down somewhat, it seems incredible that Jurgen Klopp would actually go out and sign someone like Thiago if he was aware that his running power simply isn't as good as his previous three midfielders. If, as you illustrate here, it's that important to how Liverpool play. Yeah, well, I suppose the answer to that is yes and no. It looks like a bad sign, and that's what you're judged on as a manager. It looks like a bad signing. I remember signing a player, and I've got criticised him even to this day over it, but he got injured after 4 weeks and played 15 games for me, and it looks like a bad signing. But the intention of signing Thiago for Liverpool was, you've got to involve your squad. You've got to make them better. You've got to do different things. I think one of the first couple of games from Liverpool, everything was going well. People were raving about Thiago. His passing range is phenomenal. He's able to pick out
the passing between lines. He's someone in a top game or even a game where a team like Sheffield United or Crystal Palace were sitting in, he's someone who could have came off the bench and changed the game for them. That brilliant passing range he has. So it was the right thing to do. It was the right, add another element into the squad. The problem has been, as I said to you, he's took 66% of his midfield out of the game by putting them back at centre half generally throughout the season. And Jesus, the thoughts of me, Vinny Perth criticising Jurgen Klopp, I think that was a massive mistake. I think when we see people like Nat Phillips, we done on off the ball, we done the West Ham game, and albeit he was marking Antonio, who's suits a centre half like that, he's probably the best player on the pitch, and he didn't play for 4 or 5 weeks after that. And that it makes no sense to me. I'm struggling with that. And then he's come in when Henderson got injured, and they've kept a couple of clean sheets. I don't think he's the easiest on the eye. He looks more like Jamie Carragher than Van Dijk, but at the same time, a natural defender and what they've lost out midfield. And he's admitted to the mistake effectively by what he said about Fabinho over the last sort of 7-8 days. It's been a massive loss. He called him the lighthouse. Not sure what that means, but I presume it's someone that puts is a security guard or whatever the right. I'm not sure that translated right, but that's what he called him. So he's admitted to the error himself. Just confused why it took so long. We don't know what goes on behind scenes in training, whether Phillips, he's tried Nico Williams there and different people, and it just hasn't worked.
Yeah, for sure. There's just one last image we want to skip on to, Vinny, because we're a little bit tight for time, but you've done an interesting breakdown as well of, you mentioned Nico Williams there, of the right side of Liverpool's pitch, of Trent Alexander-Arnold and the impact that's having on Mo Salah.
Yeah, I think this is huge. I mean, when Henderson played last season, we could find clips of him crossing the ball, getting to the end line, or just supporting the play where Trent Alexander got to the end line, pulled back to Henderson, that first time cross, or that three of 66 being Trent, and the way Salah is able to play in the half position between the centre half and the fullback. The knock-on effect for that is the opposition have to move over and cover him. Either the fullback goes in and that gives freedom for Trent to go down the line, or the fullback goes with Trent, centre half comes across, and now there's more space inside from Mane and Firmino. And Henderson gave them that. The difference, particularly in the last couple of weeks, is when Liverpool build up, they like to build up in a three at the back. Last season it was Fabinho, number 3 there. This year, or of late, he's got Trent a little bit deeper, and the starting position is deeper. Even in last night's game, he gets forward and he breaks forward, but he doesn't start anywhere near as high as he was last season. The difference is someone like Thiago's picking up the ball in that position. All of a sudden, the opposition back four, grand, the fullback looks after Salah, grand, the two centre-halves are in the normal position, and there isn't the same threat there, and it's really, really affected Salah, Mane and Fabinho. And like, you can't give those a free pass at times because they've missed some glorious chances, even last night. I mean, Mane's got to score a couple of times, but the setup of the team is really affecting that front three in huge amount. I actually have huge sympathy because I think on paper, and Jota it looks like the player we think he is. On paper, they're as good as any front three in the world, and I think the setup of the team is really affecting them. And then again, that's the challenge with Thiago in your team, and it's why he's come in for some criticism.
So, Vinny, if you can identify, there's no doubt Klopp has, and even the point you're making about Fabinho, does that give you more confidence that the final 8-9 weeks of the season will actually see them getting back to a level where that energy comes back into midfield? Henderson's back after the international break, so Henderson and Fabinho suddenly are driving that front three on. Like it's a very simple fix as opposed to it being a massive, complicated. They've got to wait for Van Dijk to get back. They've got to bring the confidence back in the team. Some fairly easy changes will happen automatically by the change of personnel in midfield. His first choice 3 in midfield will be back for the last 9 games. If I guaranteed that right now, would you feel confident that they're playing Champions League football next season, either through winning it or finishing in the top 4?
I don't know whether I'm confident to get into the top 4, and then winning a knockout competition can go either way. So there's difficulties with that. There's no doubt he's seen this, and they've got better facilities and better people doing this work than I have. There's obviously a problem with, say, Nat Phillips, and I don't understand it, but we don't see training. As I said, he looks more like Carragher is a good example I use. I think if they get the best players on the pitch, I think Henderson, they can afford to play Thiago in that midfield with Wijnaldum and Fabinho, for argument's sake. Henderson and Matip are centre-half. Then they'll go very close, Champions League-wise, if Matip and Henderson were to get back fit, and two of them were playing centre-half. Or if he was brave and went with Kabak or Phillips and Matip and played his first choice midfield, I think there's no doubt they've a real chance of winning the Champions League. The problem they have is they've given up that much ground to Leicester, and now Chelsea look like they're firing on all cylinders. Getting back into Champions League football is, unfortunately for Liverpool, is not guaranteed. And I think ultimately you've got to have huge sympathy for that team, because yes, I think the manager should have spotted it a little bit earlier, but the injuries has crucified them and left them short. So I couldn't guarantee them, or I couldn't look at that team and say I expect them to be in Champions League football next year. Absolutely no way. They've just got too much of a mountain to climb, but I hope they do. I think because I think they can get back to their very best.
Yeah, Vinny, good stuff. That was brilliant. Thanks a million. Cheers.
Cheers.
Vinny Perth giving us some thoughts there on the Liverpool situation. Give us your thoughts. 0879 180 180 is the number if you want to get in touch. It's 16 minutes past 8. We're going to be back with the papers and speaking rugby with Matt Williams next.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
The Saturday panel on OTB.
In the lead up to a Cheltenham Festival, Barry, is it like the All-Ireland final for a player? Like they're getting hassled for tickets. Are you just getting hassled for tips? Are you meeting people at the airport? Can you take it in your stride, or do you feel actually more pressure given the week that's in it?
It's about 28 All-Ireland finals, but lads love it. There's a great buzz, there's great atmosphere. You've grown up loving it, watching it. Now you're part of it.
Don't miss the panel every Saturday afternoon on OTB Sports Radio. Tune in 24/7 on the OTB Sports app.
Get ready for the Cheltenham Festival with the Boyle Sports app, with a special offer guaranteed on every race every day of the festival, plus extra places on each way bets over all 4 days. The Boyle Sports app has got you covered. Need to study up? Check out our Racing Post insights or watch our exclusive video previews with Cheltenham Gold Cup winning jockey Robbie Power. The Cheltenham Festival on the faster than ever Boyle Sports app. Boyle Sports. This is betting. Gamble responsibly. See gamblingcare.ie. 18 plus.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, put your best face forward with our new and improved razors.
18 minutes past 8 this morning. We'll run you through the sports pages. Not a huge amount, obviously a lot of Cheltenham stuff. And we'll show you what is on otbsports.com. Ireland's turnovers, we don't look like we have any plan. That's despite the fact that we are the best in the league at the moment on creating turnovers. The Cheltenham Festival, the Tuesday trifecta with Tom Malone. We'll be getting to that on the Cheltenham show around about 10:30 this morning. Serbia boss Stojkovic, we know how to play football and we'll show it. And a brilliant story from Pat Nevin last night about the time that Everton staged a mutiny in Donegal. Felipe Contepomi also in the papers today and on otbsports.com talking about the difference in Leinster and Ireland's defensive issues. The column there is on Scotland having a right to feel aggrieved at Roman Potts' work at the breakdown. Ireland just can't make games from their turnover bounty. It's Jerry Thornley's piece. And then match reports, obviously the main stuff in most of them. That horrific clash that saw the Wolves keeper stretchered off. We heard a little bit earlier on that he's doing okay. Bookmakers fear big losses. No one's crying for them. In the back of the Times, Joshua and Fury signed deal, $500 million, 400 million sterling, which is going to be 100 million each for them over 2 fights. I think that's what it's going to be. 100 million each for the first fight and 100 million each for the second fight. The Daily Mirror, I'm done here. Frustrated midfielder eyes exit. This is Donny van de Beek wants to quit Old Trafford after less than a season. Sickening head injury, KO's keeper Patricio, and the Cheltenham Festival is there. The Mirror going with the fact that Aubameyang was angrily revving his car outside the training ground while all his teammates were doing the...
he certainly wasn't in the warm down.
Right.
That's for sure.
Okay.
So I'm not sure about the revving though. The revving is a lovely little wrinkle to it, but he wasn't in the warm down.
A jot in the arm, Diogo's hopes for Patricio after keeper's horror smash, and Banner stay tight-lipped. It looks like there was one of those Zoom meetings where people were making claim and counterclaim involving the Clare County Board, but somebody did come up with a good idea of why don't we just have an audit? Let's see what the story is. Let's let the facts shine a light on it. No one fears facts. Facts are the antidote in any virus like this. Fury versus Joshua fight agreed in £400 million sterling deal, and that's Diego Jota looking to the skies. The Examiner leading with a picture of Willie Mullins. Appreciate it, Willie. Irish punters looking for supreme start from masked Marvel Mullins, and that's essentially it. It's that we have a stay of execution on perhaps there being some games in Dublin in the Euros this year, and all the rest of the headlines are essentially the same across the back pages of the Stars. I look forward to the Cheltenham Festival, and then Ringrose injury, a hammer blow for club and country, so it looks like he could be out for 6 weeks with an ankle injury. Now, it is to rugby that we're turning. It's a spectacular week of sport on Virgin Media Television this week, with all 4 days racing for the Cheltenham Festival, the UEFA Champions League and UEFA Europa League, and the Six Nations all live on Virgin Media this week. And to chat about this week's Six Nations, I'm delighted to say we've got Matt Williams with us this morning. Matt, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning, Joe. Good to talk to you, mate. Very well, thank you.
So we should start with the injuries, because this time yesterday we were speculating about potential changes for the England game. We know that James Ryan is out, and we know that Gary Ringrose is out. Let's talk about James Ryan first, because you know, we lost the last time. We didn't play a game against a very good side, but you can clearly see that he's reaching a level of proficiency and excellence that is beyond what we have available to us. How do you make up for it if you're a head coach when you see somebody like James Ryan going out?
Well, I think first thing is your attitude. Injury is just part of the game. Like, control the controllables sounds like a cliche, but it's exactly what you've got to do in the week of a big game. That is something that is out of the coach's control. So what can he control? He can control the selection of who he brings in. How does he balance? Does he bring in? Does he move Byrne from the back row into the second row? Does he bring in another back row? Does he leave him there? You know, how you manipulate that situation to maximise the benefit for your team is the only thing you can do as a coach. Because to sit there and say, woe is me, I've lost a great player, which he is, and it's the truth, and the rest of us can do that, but the head coach and the staff just can't do that. They have to get on with the job of preparing the side. It's as simple and as cliched as that.
Who would you pick? What would you do? Because obviously Peter O'Mahony comes back into the reckoning, and Tyke Byrne's been brilliant in the back row, but you know, there was definitely a concern that he didn't have the heft for second row, particularly against a team like England, for example.
Yeah, well, they're a very powerful pack. We saw that on Saturday. When England functioned, as they did against France, in what was just a fantastic game of rugby. The first half of that game was one of the most entertaining halves of rugby I've seen in many years. It was a belter of a game. You have to match them at their set piece. So I think that if I take you back one little step, you're preparing for England is a different mentality to preparing for Scotland. England are military in their mindset. They love a set battle. They love the set piece. They want a confrontation. And without falling into cliches, but it's exactly how you've got to approach this. You've got to give them what you don't want. So at set piece, you have to match them, but don't give them the confrontation. And how do you do that? You don't run into their head-on battles. You've got to play terror tactics against England. And the biggest terror tactic Ireland have at the moment is their defensive line-out is world-class. Matter of fact, it's the best in the world at the moment. They are just ripping apart opposition ball. And you can't play without the ball. We saw the Scots on Saturday just couldn't play without the ball. Now, James Ryan was integral to that defensive line-out. So rather than, again, to come into cliches, to quote Abraham Lincoln, don't weaken a strength to strengthen a weakness. Tyke Byrne at 6 has been an absolute revelation. I think I was on the show here saying I'd like to see him at 6. Now, I'd like to say I predicted he'd be this good. I didn't. He has been absolutely sensational. Don't put him back in the second row. You've got young Baird there, or you've got other options. I'd go with Baird at the moment. Cometh the hour, cometh the man. And he's a big, big man. You've got to have bulk in that second row to hold their scrum. Because the other thing, the English are scrummaging illegally. A lot of those penalties on Saturday, I thought the referee Brace had a very good game. I'm not criticising him, but the referees are guessing the scrum. We're coming back to set play again. Now, if you put Baird in the second row, he's very good in the air. He's young, he's athletic. He can switch on to what Paul O'Connell's defensive line out is. He's been in the team, so put him there. He's a big dude, so he's going to give you power in that scrum. You need a specialist tight head second rower. Now, loose head second rower as the tight head there. Now, that gives you a good scrum because England are scrummaging illegally. Genge, in particular, when he comes off the bench, is coming across. And so you've got to have a really powerful scrum to match their set play. If you can match their set play, you're halfway there against England. If you can't, as the French saw in the later stages of that game when their scrum got in trouble because of the illegal scrummaging, then you're on the ropes. If you match their set play, then you're smart about how you attack, which is getting back on the blind side to them. You've got a bit of a chance against them, but they're a very good side.
The Peter O'Mahony issue, obviously, he had a moment of madness, not out of character because it's not the first time this season, so he can't say, oh, look, it's not me, I've never done it. It's literally the second time in the last 15, 20 games that we've seen you do it. So do you say you can go straight back into the team, that's okay, we forgive you, fair enough? Or do you say, I can't put you straight back in the team because the message is wrong? What's the psychological dynamic that you need to be aware of as a coach? Or do you care about any of that and just say, I think you're probably still a better 7 than Connors, and from a defensive line-out perspective, you're world class in that, and so therefore I'm putting you in? Or is it like, well, Will Connors has not put a foot wrong?
Connors has been more than not put a foot wrong. He's played very well. I'm sure all the listeners and viewers will remember the tackle he did on Van der Merwe there, just on the try line. Was one of the most extraordinary tackles I've seen in years. Van der Merwe was going to score for all money, and somehow Connors hit him on the try line, and didn't just hit him, spun and kept the pressure on. He just couldn't spin and put the ball down. And Connors has been chopping people down in defence ever since he's got his opportunity. Peter hasn't played for a month. I thought Peter was finished a year ago. I'm going to be on, and I've said this before on the show, and I've got to give Peter huge credit. He came back, reinvented himself, and has played exceptionally well. But he hasn't played for a month. That's a big thing for a flanker. So he's not going to do your 80 minutes. So you're going to have someone on the bench to come on. You're going to disrupt that back row that has functioned very well since it's been together. And again, as I said before, I'm not sure moving Tyke Byrne into the second row gives us the bulk required in that tight 5 to match a very, very big English tight 5. So there's a lot to weigh up for the coaching staff. Now, the coaching staff will know better than me. That's the other thing I've got to put out there. When you're with the team day in, day out, you know better. Bringing Peter O'Mahony back in wouldn't be an issue for me. He's done his time, did the crime, do the time, all's forgiven. You can't carry that on. It was done. It's stuffed up the whole Six Nations for that team. Whether that message is something that needs to be reinforced with that group, well, then Coach Farrell knows better than me. If it was me, or you can't keep punishing a guy when he's already served his punishment. It's a tight call. Personally, I wouldn't do it because I don't think he's got the miles on the clock in training and playing for such a big game that's going to be at an incredible intensity. I just don't think he'd be ready for that after a month on the sideline. But again, coaching staff will know better than me.
Are we going to see a change on the wing then, Matt? Because that is the other talking point after James Lowe's performance at the weekend.
Yeah, I've got to say, yeah. You know, when you're on radio and TV and you know James Lowe's family and friends and partners and are listening, you know, you hate to beat up on a guy for missing a tackle or tackles because, you know, it's humiliating. And I don't want to do that, you know. Like James Lowe's played really great rugby for Leinster. He's played really well with the ball in his hand for Ireland. But it's just got to him at the moment. It just happens at times in players' careers sometimes. There's a lot of great wingers especially out there will tell you they had a patch where they didn't defend well. and it's a psychological thing more than a physical thing. Like, he's not scared, we know that. But he just came into that tackle on Sunday, in totally the wrong, body position. And he just put his arm across the ball carrier's shoulder when it was just such an easy tackle to hit him around the ribs. It would have been such an easy tackle. You saw him just hesitate there on the Scottish try. If he showed a little bit more urgency, I think he could have stopped that try before it got to the point where it was. And they're all just little psychological things. And I think with the Stockdale and Lama fit, I think James has got to go back out of that side just for a little while, reassess his performances, confront them, and I'm certain that a guy with his talent will come back. But just right now, his defensive play and his work rate off the ball is not where it needs to be. And unfortunately for him, I think that does need to be, and for the betterment of the team, that is a decision that needs to be made.
Felipe Contepomi pointed out yesterday that Leinster and Ireland played different defensive systems, and that may be one of the reasons why James Lowe hasn't performed too well on the opposite side of the ball. Is that an excuse, Matt, an acceptable excuse? Is there just patience required for him to bed into a new system?
I'm totally in agreement with Felipe, and I would much prefer to see Ireland playing Leinster's system. I think just so everyone, your listeners and viewers know, what Ireland are doing is they're making their wingers, who are the last man on the defensive line out, jam in. So rush off, leave your winger. Your winger's here. Leave him and jam in and put pressure on the second last attacker. Now, okay, I understand the theory of that. But when you're 10 metres from your try line and you're not outnumbered, so there's 2 attackers, two defenders, you don't need to do that. Just take your man and you make your tackle. But that seems to be the policy. Now, I've got that from within the team that's the policy, but I haven't heard the defensive coach and the head coach come out and say that, and then they mightn't do it. Now, if it is, I think it's a mad policy, and I think it's very, very hard on the wingers. And I can show you, as we did on TV the other day, where Ireland have let in a number of tries because of that policy. But James has also missed straight-up tackles. When he's got to the man against France, he missed the tackle. When he got to the man against Scotland, he missed the tackle. When he was coming across to cover that kick, as he should, from the left wing coming across on Sunday against Scotland, when the kick was pushed through, he should have been much more urgent. That's got nothing to do with defensive systems. So I think there are two arguments here, and Felipe's defending his player, which is his job. And it's a different defensive system. I much prefer the Leinster defensive system. Now let me put my hands up. It's a system that I coach, that Felipe played under, and Leo played under, and Emmy Farrell played under, who are all coaches there. It stood the test of time, and it works. And I'm sure it's a much, much better system now than I introduced 20 years ago. I'm not claiming that I did that system, but it's a similar system. In your try line, if you've got in your 22, if you've got the same numbers, 5 attackers, 5 defenders, just stick on your man and make your tackle. Take personal responsibility to make your tackle. You don't have to jam in, you don't have to shift if you've got numbers. And that's a very basic 101 system. You'd be teaching that to your under 14s, under 15s. Now, this system where you're leaving the man and coming in, like, it's huge pressure, it's huge gambling. And right now at international level, it just ain't working. And it has to change for Ireland, because England are going to rip us apart out there if we don't change it. So there's 2 separate issues here. I would sadly replace James Lowe, but I would also change that defensive system in our 22.
So there has to be a reason why they've implemented the system at national level. What are the benefits, and why aren't those benefits being seen in this team?
I personally, I mean, well, let's go to other sports. Let's go to GAA. All right, well, let's go to football. The ball's coming down near your goal. You've got your defenders all lined out, and you put 2 defenders on 1 attacker. What's the benefit? There ain't no benefit. You're putting pressure on that guy's skills. If he's got the skills and passes it to the unmarked man, you're absolutely shot. And it's exactly the same in rugby. You're gambling that you're going to put pressure on the skills of the second last attacker. and his skills will crumble. You'll snuff the attack out there now. But if his skills are good, as George North's were for Wales and was Gail Ficker's for France, you're going to lose. And it's just a gamble that you don't need to do. I think it's madness. I just think it's absolute madness. I can't give you, that's the rationale behind it, but it's not something I would be, I would love to coach against that. I would love to coach. I'd say, hey, boys, guess what? We get in the 22, the wingers coming in. Let's stand 1.5 meters deeper. Make sure your pass is out in front so we're running onto the ball. We'll take these guys every single time. Let's play to the fringe. Let's play to the fringe every single time. I'd be jumping out of my skin coaching against that system. I think it's madness. Matt, so I can't tell you.
Where is Andy Farrell at this stage in your estimation, kind of from the big picture? Because obviously, I know he was a very experienced coach and he'd obviously been around the international setup a lot, but you know, the difference between stepping into the big job and being responsible for absolutely everything, all the stuff that comes with that. Suddenly you're caring about logistics and contracts and stuff that previously you had an interest in and you were aware of vaguely, but now all of a sudden your meetings go from 2 or 3 hours a day to 7 or 8 hours a day, and the time that you had to influence what you're actually paid to do diminishes. All of that he's had to get used to, while at the same time there's been the pandemic and the lack of proper structured time together. They've got 15 minutes in game rooms before they're all supposed to go out. So it's been a weird situation. The IRFU made the decision, and they're clearly, I would say, not going to change that before the next World Cup, because that would reflect terribly on David Nucifora. So I would suspect that almost irrespective of what happens, barring a 60-point defeat at the weekend, he's going to be our head coach next season, and then it's far too late because we're 1 year out from the World Cup. So where is he? What's the truth?
Well, you're right, Joe. Being assistant coach in the game today is the best job in the world. Of course, like Stuart Lancaster is a prime example. Stuart must be loving what he's doing because he's just coaching technically. He's out in the field doing the things that coaches like Stuart and I love, which is being with the guys, ball in hand, technically showing the guys how to get better, thinking about the game. How can you outthink your opposition? How can you manipulate the defence? How can you manipulate the attack? It's a joy. It's an intellectual challenge as well. It's fun. Whereas the head coach, as you say, is dealing with budgets. He's got to go and do media commitments. He's dealing with contracts. He's dealing with staff. He's dealing with problems with personnel. He's dealing with the logistics of travel. He's got to go and do the things for registering players for the European Cup. He's 6 weeks ahead in a whole lot of his planning. And that drags the head coach away from what you love doing, which is the field. So that's the reality. And I've said to everyone, I just think it was so hard on Andy, never having done that before. Ronan and I had this discussion the other day, and you know, like if you consider the coaches around the world, like let's go to Michael Checker. He was a bolter into Leinster, a bolter, but he was head coach of a Randwick in Sydney. Now he was very fortunate to get that gig, but he'd been a head coach at a big club in Sydney. Now they were an amateur club, but he'd done something. He then goes from Leinster to the Waratahs. He wins trophies at Leinster, wins trophy at the Waratahs, and goes on to Australia. So he's had 6 to 8 years as a head coach before he goes to a national side. Gregor Townsend, you look at he was at Glasgow for a number of years. You go around the coaches around the world, and even though some of them, excuse me, like Steve Hansen, who became head coach of New Zealand, he was from assistant coach at New Zealand to head coach. He was head coach of Wales. So he'd be the head coach of a national side before he became head coach of New Zealand. So, and I'm not saying Andy's not capable of that. He's a very capable man and he's done a lot in coaching, but it's so hard to step from assistant coach to never have been a head coach of a national side. A lot of guys step back in the club to be head coach of club because you are going to make mistakes. The very first thing you have to accept when you are given a coaching role is that you will make errors of judgment. That just comes with a badge, as John Wayne says. When you are made a head coach, accept you are going to make mistakes. It's how you recover and detect and accept that you've made those mistakes that determines how successful you will be. Now, I've done them. Everyone's going to do it. Now, what should happen? So where is he? I do not want Andy Farrell to fail. Ronan sort of said that on TV the other day. It's the last thing I want. I want to see Ireland win. And what I'm frustrated about, and I've been frustrated for 20 years, is I can't see Ireland at their current rate being successful at the next World Cup. And that drives me crackers because that's a good team. We've got a very good team. From the forwards to the backs, with the exception of the halves where we're skinny, 9 and 10 we're skinny, we've got a lot of good depth. As we'll show this weekend when we lose Ryan and Ringrose, we've got good depth. But our halves haven't. Now, we've got to work at that. But our form and our attack and what we just spoke about defence, like we go to the World Cup with those plans, we're shot. We're not going to get out of the quarters. We might make the corners because we've got a really tough pool. So what I would like, where is Andy? I don't know, I'm not there. But if Andy is going to make it, and I would really strongly advise him to do this, he needs to get some independent guys in, not the IRFU, and they're going to give you the honest truth. It doesn't have to be published in all the newspapers, but it needs to go to him and maybe Nusafora, and to give him a snapshot of where they are. And then you've got to have the courage to think about those recommendations, those reflections that you get on doing a thorough review of your organisation and make the decisions. I'll give you an example of that. Wayne Pivac, to his credit, who was head coach for a long time at the Scarlets, did it, and was also a head coach in New Zealand before he took the Welsh job. He had a terrible 2020. He's got a barrel really pointed at his head. He's in trouble. He does a thorough review. He looks at his defensive coach, who has been with him every second of the journey at the Scarlets, and he makes the terribly hard decision, this gut-wrenching decision, to let his friend and long-term collaborator in defence go. And they bring in another guy. And look what's happened to their defence. Their defence has gone through the roof. Now, that's a really awful, horrible situation. It ruptures that relationship. So Wayne Pivac's lost a friendship. You'll never get that back. It's over. But Wales have kicked on. Now, Ireland, and I'm not saying, I have been in a position where I've had my contract broken by my employer. I hate the word sacked, because usually when you're a coach and you get your contract broken, which is how I put it, and I took them to court and I won, but when you get your contract broken, it rips you apart. It rips your family apart. It puts your children under pressure. It's nothing I would wish on my worst enemy. But if you go into professional coaching, that's going to happen to you at some point. If you stay there long enough, there's only two good coaches in the world, those who have been sacked and those who will be sacked. And it's horrible.
Leinster,
but in the same breath, sorry, mate.
Leinster did this with Graham Henry. They got him in for 10 weeks or whatever, even shorter period of time. And I think it was actually much shorter than that. It might have been 4 weeks. He came in and had a quick look around, said Joey Carby is their 10 of the future. And very quickly after that, they got Lancaster on board.
Yep. Great. And Graham Henry has been through that process. So they lost to France in the 2007 World Cup in the quarterfinal. All of New Zealand called for the sacking. Sack the coach, sack the coach, sack the coach, sack the coach. They did an independent review, and the review came out and said, it wasn't the coach's fault, it was the leadership on the field. These are our recommendations. Keep that coaching group together. They kept them together and they won the next World Cup. So sometimes that review, and the Kiwis do this all the time. They're the best in the world at it. They take their hard medicine, they look at the questions and they do it. We don't have a culture of doing that. And we also don't have a culture of saying, with true belief and honesty, win the World Cup. We don't do that. We sort of pay a little bit of lip service to it. And that's the reality. Now, I'll tell you why I back that up. If you went to Munster and Leinster and you said, it's okay if you don't win the Heineken Cup, it's okay if you don't get trophies, you get laughed out the door. It's not okay. Munster are getting absolutely dog's abuse because they're making semi-finals. Any other team in Europe would be delighted to make semi-finals. But the culture for the Heineken Cup in Ireland is you win it, boyo. You win it or face the consequences. Now, we do not have the same attitude to the World Cup as we do to the Heineken Cup, and that's wrong. That is really, really wrong. We need to change our attitude. I'm talking about the IRFU, the leaders. They need to change their attitude to demanding excellence from our national side, because we demand it from our provinces. And when our provinces don't deliver, we act and we move. But we're not doing that with the national side, and we need to do that. Not to bash up on Andy Farrell, not to sack him. That's not what I want. I wouldn't want that on my worst enemy. But we do have a responsibility to the jersey. You are only stewards of the team. You don't own the team. When you're a coach, you're a steward. You've got to steward it for 3 years, 4 years, 2 years, and you pass it on to someone else. And the true measure of a good coach is you pass it on to the next guy in better shape than you got it. And that's your gig. That's your job. And that's why you take pride in what the club or something is doing after you leave. You know, if you can hand it on in better shape, then you've done your job. You mightn't have done a perfect job, but if you hand it on in worse shape, then, you know, you've let that club down.
Yeah. Or
that national side down. But that you have to hand it on better. And right now, when it comes to World Cups, quarterfinal, no one is handing it on in better shape from the World Cup. That cycle has to be broken. And it's not going to be broken by nice guys. It's going to be broken by tough, hard people who are uncompromising, hard-nosed, and demand winning.
Matt, good stuff. Great to have you with us as ever. Thanks a million for joining us.
Love it, boys. I'm pumped up for the day.
Yeah, good stuff. Matt Williams, I hope everybody's pumped up after hearing that as well. It's interesting that that's fairly similar to the stuff that we heard out of Pat Lam when he was talking about Ireland's relationship with the World Cup, our curious obsession with the quarterfinals and why it is that we desperately want to win a quarterfinal. Because what happens when we win that quarterfinal, Eoin? We're going to immediately go mad as a nation and decide, right, that's it, tournament's over, it doesn't really matter what happens from here, give me my third, fourth place playoff, I'm happy with my bronze or whatever do they give out a little tin medal to the team who finished fourth? Is there, I mean, do you know what I mean? There's like, our obsession with the quarterfinal is going to at some point be broken and we'll reach the semi and we'll consider ourselves to have won the World Cup. And that team will have grown up in a culture where they'll be able to look down on every other Irish rugby team that went before them and go, nah, 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 nah. What good is that?
A few more generations, then the semi-final will become this magical thing, and then the final will eventually be the thing they get to, and then
we're all dead. You and me will be dead by the time that happens. The World Cup happens every 4 years.
As long as we're putting the graft in for our grandchildren, I'm happy.
Right. Brian the Bryant says, complaining about our wings' poor defence is a national pastime. Earl, Stockdale, Larmour have all been slated. Lowe is the most dangerous attacker in Ireland still. We do have an obsession with blaming our wingers for everything. James says, as for the Lowe conversation, we have a history of dropping wings who don't get fully trusted again, like Bowe and Murphy with O'Sullivan, who should have more caps. It's true, Jordan Murphy. Imagine if we'd like just sat him down and said, this is what we want you to do. Keep bringing your creative. We might have got over the quarter-final at one stage, you know? Who knows? All of this is possible. It's 8:47 this morning here. If you want to get in touch with us, we'd love to hear from you. 0879 180 180 is the WhatsApp number. So Energia has confirmed a new 3-year sponsorship with Wexford Youth Women's Football Club. The sponsorship will cover the €500 annual membership fees for each player on the women's senior team and the senior squad over a 3-year period, with a key focus on supporting meaningful change within women's sport. The sponsorship will allow the club to provide the players with more resources and support outside of day-to-day expenses, which opens up a field of opportunities for Wexford Youth Women's FC. The players currently cover their own expenses, including travel to and from matches, even at professional level, unlike their male counterparts. So this is a big breakthrough for Wexford Youth, and I'm delighted to say Kylie Murphy is with us to talk to us about this. Kylie, good morning to you. How are you getting on?
Morning, how's it going?
This is a big breakthrough for you guys.
Massive. It's absolutely incredible, so it is.
What difference does it make?
It makes the world a difference. I mean, to not have to be going out year in at the start of every year looking for sponsorship, like you said a minute ago. It's, do you know, to have to come up with €500 at the start of every year is not easy. And for Energia to come on, and they've basically took away, I suppose, that pay for play that we had. Do you know, it's just incredible, like, and we're so grateful to them, because to be able to focus solely on our pre-season and the season ahead is just, it's incredible. And it's not only 1 year, like, I mean, to come in and support us for 3 years, it's amazing, and we're absolutely delighted.
So that pay for play that you're talking about, you guys are playing in the Women's National League, and for the honour of doing that, you guys had to pay and fundraise yourselves, which is a world away from the men's game, where admittedly it's small amounts of money, but they're getting paid to do that.
Yeah, it's there's still a huge gap there, do you know? And do you know, when you say pay for play, you are ideally, you're going out raising money, you're looking for sponsors, you're looking for big businesses, small businesses, whatever it may be, like. But there has been girls that put their hand in their own pocket to, do you know, because they can't get somebody to sponsor them, or they're not lucky enough to have somebody supporting them do you know, in the background, that they've paid their own money. Do you know, it's not, I'm not saying Wexford are saying you have to pay this money and that's it, but ideally we all know it's an expensive, I suppose it's expensive to run a club, do you know, and the money has to come in from somewhere, do you know, and we don't have that we haven't had before Energia the financial support. Do you know, we've had people come in and be really, really generous to us, but I mean, like, what Energia are doing is just it's just completely blowing it out of the park. Do you know, to take away that we don't have to bring in that €500 at the start of every year, it's just unreal.
Yeah, and I think this kind of, you know, it's one example of the many changes that have happened in the National League over the last 10 years or so, where the organisation itself wasn't particularly great. Then the fixture list became fairly well established, and then the fixtures became kind of almost guaranteed, and then TV coverage begins and media coverage begins to pick up. So you've kind of seen a bit of a revolution over the last 10 years or so.
Oh my God, unbelievable. And more so in the last year. It's all of that has just come so quick. And you know, I have to say it has been slow. It's been a slow burner. Do you know, I would have liked to see a lot more change within 10 years. Like, I mean, 10 years is a long time, do you know, from the very start to now. But look, again, I'm so thankful that it's starting to happen now. They've just between the FAI and the SSE Electricity coming in on board and Energia, and you see other clubs are putting things up on social media and people are coming in and sponsoring, and they're just getting better looked after, and it's fantastic to see. It's not, I don't want to sit here and say, oh, it's only Wexford we want to push forward and succeed. It's every club in the Women's National League. It's every female in every sport in Ireland. We want every one of them to I suppose, get what they've earned. Do you know, they're out there, they're working hard, they're working just as hard as anybody else is, do you know, so it's great to see.
Why do you think the last year has seen so much change?
I'm not too sure. I know there's a new head lad gone in the FAI, so obviously he has an awful lot got to do with it. I presume so. And then obviously the SSE Electricity coming in for a 2-year deal is amazing as well. Do you know, to run probably alongside the men's league, but even doing is it Watch League of Ireland? I think they're letting all of our games be streamed all this year for free. Like, that's amazing. Do you know, to say that maybe younger boys and girls can just click on and have a look at our games. Do you get the feel?
Yeah, like, do you get the feeling then that there's been like a bit of an attitude shift over the last 12 months, where the league has been seen as more of a product that is very valuable to the umbrella of the FAI?
I think so, yeah. I think there was a lot of focus on them over the last number of months, you know, and I think it was either, you know what, it's something has to be done, because it just, what was happening just wasn't good enough, you know. There was no movement, there was nothing. I mean, one year it might be, oh, we're going to do this and it'll be fantastic, but then all of a sudden it's just gone, and for 2 years later it's not being done. Do you know, it needs to be a stepping stone, and every year it needs to be added and getting better, but it was just kind of stop start, and it wasn't running. I don't know, it just, something wasn't right anyway. But I do feel in the last number of months that things are really, there's a really big push being put on, a really good emphasis, so hopefully now we can just keep going forward with it and keep building.
When you say that over the last 10 years, parts of the change have been a little bit slow when it comes to the league, what are you talking about specifically, and what needs to happen over the next little while?
I mean, something maybe so small, not small, because to us it's not small, but even down to a fixture list. Do you know, not being done properly, our fixtures not coming out on time, then fixtures changing, and obviously, you know, like the weather, obviously we can't do anything about. We might have games that get cancelled, and then all of a sudden it's weeks before we know when that game is being rescheduled, and then it could be scheduled a week before they want us to play. I mean, like, every player that's playing, you know, I suppose in terms you're a professional athlete, but you're not. Do you know what I mean? Everybody's lives behind it, and do you know, it's just something of a fixture list just to be done out and done right. It's just, it feels good, and it feels, do you know, it's just a step forward.
Sort of the fixtures list this year, for example, is better than it would have been over the last couple of seasons, or at least it's more set.
Yeah, it came out early, and there was an announcement when it was coming out, and it came out on that date. Do you know, it probably sounds like it's something really small, but it's absolutely not. Do you know, it's massive to us. So even to see that structure, do you know, it's structure in the league, and we know this is going to happen, and we know going forward this is what has to be done.
Do you guys feel like you have a voice around that kind of stuff now more than you might have had in previous years? And it just feels like for me, it certainly feels like the focus on the women's international team has begun to filter down. It hasn't quite reached the level that it needs to just yet around your league, but certainly Vera Pauw has become somebody that almost everybody who follows sport in Ireland would be familiar with the fact that here is the manager of the national team, whereas Colin Bell, prior to that, I think people might have known who Colin Bell was, and before that, when you go back, I'd say, you know, people were stretching around in the recesses of their mind to try and identify the national head coach. So there's been an uplift in terms of the coverage of the national team. Are you beginning to feel like there is some voice at least for the league, or do we still have a good bit to go in your mind?
A little bit of both. I think that what the girls done a couple of years ago is amazing, and Vera being in, I think, definitely is making good strides. But again, I do still think that we've a good bit to go. But I mean, like, you know, it's starting to happen. So I don't want to sit here and complain too much, you know, because it is starting to move. And these things can't probably be done overnight. There's a lot of stuff goes on behind the scenes. Me personally, and the girls with Wexford, we've a really, really, really good committee there. And anything that we need to talk about or we need to voice, like, they're there to listen, and, you know, they're fighting for us on that end, you know. And I would like to think that every other committee and club is fighting for their players and what they think maybe should be done going forward, you know. But yeah, I do think we're starting to get some bit of movement anyway, you know. So hopefully it's filtering down what the international team done a couple of years ago and what they're doing now. You know, you can see them, the media for them, everything is starting to be highlighted an awful lot more. So fingers crossed it keeps moving.
Ella Malloy plays with you guys, is that right?
She does, yeah.
Yeah, obviously she made her international debut, I think, against Germany. Last December, only 16. So you're starting to see that talent level bubble up where any player around the country can think, well, I actually can play for the national team here if I put my head down and I work on my skills. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, that opportunity is there for any young girl coming up. I mean, Ellen's a special talent, and I'm sure there's so many special kids all over Ireland, you know, and it's great, you know. Again, like, I go back to the streaming that's going to be done now all year for our games. Like, there's young kids that can go on and just watch the women's games, you know. In terms of when I was younger, the only female athlete I ever probably seen on TV was Sonia O'Sullivan, and that was every 2 year, every 4 year, you know. It wasn't enough, whereas kids can go on nowadays, and hopefully this year they really give it a good push, and to be able to see the likes of Ellen, and see that Ellen's only 16, she might only be a couple of years away from them. Do you know that oh my God, if she can do it, maybe I can do it, you know. It's absolutely, I think it's fantastic, and the pathway is getting so much better. There's so many good coaches there, there's so many really good people behind the scenes that are really willing to push and do good for female athletes.
And Peamount are obviously going to be the favourites again, I suspect, this year?
Yeah, I'm sure they are.
You guys are going to beat them?
I'm hopeful we do.
Are they going to be as strong as they were last year?
Listen, there's no taking away the talent in abundance that Peamount have. There's, do you know what I mean? All you have to do is literally look at their team on paper. It's just phenomenal. But, do you know, they've been back-to-back champions there now, and I've no doubt they're pushing on to do a three in a row. But you know, we're not going to step aside either. You know, obviously Wexford's plan is to be back up there, so we're working hard behind the scenes and in pre-season, and, you know, hopefully we've put in an awful lot of work now over the last number of months. The boys have been excellent, Tom and Stephen and lads, and they're putting in an awful lot of an effort, you know, as they do every year. But we feel like we're having a good at pre-season, we're signing a few players, and you know, the mood in the camp is good. So, do you know, and it was sore not picking up anything last year. Do you know, it had been a while since we hadn't probably had our hands on a bit of silverware. Do you know, and every year that's the aim is silverware and to be at the top. So that was a little sore one last year. So we'll come again anyway. We won't be giving up.
Okay, well, look, we wish you all the best of luck, and free to concentrate on the football after the energy deal as well. Congratulations on that, and we'll obviously talk to you again over the course of the season. Thanks a million, Kylie. Cheers.
Okay, thanks, lads. Thank you. Kylie
Murphy from Wexford Youth there, giving us a very good news story from the Women's National League. If you want to get in touch with us this morning, 087 9 180 180 is the number to get in touch with us by. You can leave a comment on the YouTube channel as well. We'll be back in a moment with some of your comments and a conversation about why watching sport is good for you.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
OTB. Muse, I think, is probably how he feels in his head, but Muse, how they could go from where they were last season, 99 points, 67 games unbeaten at home, to a situation where they could be on the edge today of losing 6 games in a row at home.
OTB live commentary. Never miss the action right here on OTB Sports Radio. Keep up to date with the latest scores on the OTB Sports app. The OTB Sports app. Live score updates straight to your phone.
Sean, what's that thing going round the garden?
That is our new Husqvarna Automower.
Automower?
Yeah, it's a robotic lawnmower from Husqvarna. Cuts the grass automatically, has GPS tracking and an app. Even works in the rain. I just thought, why spend time cutting grass when I could spend it with the family?
Great! You can put the dinner on, so...
No can do, love. Have to paint the man cave.
Husqvarna Automower. Never mow again. Learn more at husqvarna.ie.
Now, the key thing, folks, is that you enjoyed Cheltenham over the next 4 days. It's a very unusual festival. It's behind closed doors. But in 2001, we didn't even have a festival with foot and mouth. It's going to be a great 4 days. We hope racing puts itself in the shop window for all the right reasons. Honeysuckle today, Rachel Blackmore. What a story that would be if she won the champion hurdle at 3:05 for Ireland, and she's on a Plutarch in the Gold Cup. Album photo going for 3 Gold Cups. 17 winners for Ireland last year. We're hoping for a similar tally this year. I think we're going to have a very good week. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you my nap for the festival, John Duggan's nap, in association with Paddy Power. We'll be given a €200 charity bet today, and the nap is Next Destination in the 450, trained by Paul Nicholls. This was once a Grade 1 winning hurdler for Willie Mullins. Now has gone to Paul Nicholls, has had time off, had an injury, but has rebounded now with 2 chase wins in a row, is a good jumper, and is a really strong stayer with a touch of class. I think Next Destination is better than these, and he's 9-4. I think he might win the 450 today. The rest of my selections are now live on otbsports.com and on the OTB Sports app. So if you want to get my picks for the champion hurdle, the other races in the day, with lots of favourites, but also with Cheltenham, not all these favourites are going to win. They're going to be outsiders. They're going to be thrills and spills. There's going to be shocks. So I think that it's about a long week and it's a marathon, not a sprint. So do gamble responsibly. Never gamble more than you can afford. Don't forget as well, 10:30, the Cheltenham show, the whispers, the phone calls, the bits of news with Jerry Gilroy, Tom Malone, Johnny Ward, Paddy Power, and myself, 10:30 till 11:30 every single day. And it's all in association with Paddy Power. Don't feel like a punter. Feel like a favourite this Cheltenham.
Tom Watson, you're welcome to Golf Weekly.
Hey, this is going to be fun.
Very happy to say European captain and, of course, 3-time major winner Padraig Carrington joins us.
Today's special guest on Golf Weekly is Lee Westwood.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I'm honoured and delighted.
Let's bring in Paul McGinley, who joins us now. Paul, you're very welcome.
Shane Lowry, how are you keeping?
I'm good, thanks, yeah. Well, I'm as good as I can be.
The biggest names in golf and Ireland's best golf podcast, Golf Weekly, now exclusively available on Patreon. Go to otbsports.com/Golf Weekly to sign up now.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, put your best face forward with our new and improved razors.
Right, 2 minutes past 9, as John Duggan said in the ad break there. Make sure you come back to us at 10:30 this morning and every morning this week for our Cheltenham special, every day in association with Paddy Power. We'll be giving you all the latest whispers from the track and some detail on the early morning price moves that would tend to indicate a big gamble or a piece of information. So make sure you stay tuned for that. And a reminder, of course, OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. Richard says the wings don't have a chance. They're getting the ball on the wing without a single defender being committed and getting any space. So that was I think the point about the attacking threat that our wingers were creating. Connor says Lowe's defensive reads are poor, Larmour's aerial game is poor, and Stockdale has been mistake-ridden. Far cry of Lewis Rees-Zammit, Josh Adam, Johnny May, Anthony May, Jack Noel. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that all of those wingers, if we were to watch every single play, have made mistakes as the games have gone ahead, particularly the English wingers who haven't been in great form until the France game when they started to play a little bit better as well. Look, I think you pays your money, you take your choice with wingers at this point, and they're always going to have they're a little bit like goalkeepers in that their mistakes always end up in tries because they end up being late on in the defensive process and there's no one really left to rescue them. On Liverpool, let it always be said that Kendo Cunningham had his reservations about Thiago and Klopp's system. Kendo sees all. Kendo is omnipotent. See, if Kenny... Maybe we should put Kenny on Twitter for his victory lap, and then he could delete his account the week afterwards, and that would be it. It'd be the greatest Twitter experience of all time.
No, I was just about to say that. This is an extraordinary moment for humankind. That somebody who said something on Twitter, somebody saying something was shared on Twitter and went viral, and subsequently that person was right, and that person is getting retrospective credit for it. This is a landmark moment for social media because the only way I've ever seen it happen in the past is people going back months earlier to something that's been said, is if you are wrong, when your cold take gets exposed, you could say 100 right things and they could all be seeded out into the social media world, but it is that one incorrect thing that people will come back to 3 months later. You cannot win. You could have a 99% success rate and you will still end up looking like an idiot. Kenny Cunningham has completely inverted the matrix here. This is, as I say, a landmark moment for Twitter, for social media at large. Kenny has hacked the system.
He needs to take his victory lap, though, right? I mean, how can anybody resist taking their victory lap? He should go back and like all of those ones calling him a clown and know nothing. All of those ones that had like pictures of him, you know, making a bad tackle, like you know, passive aggressively going through every single one, like adding them all or sliding into their DMs, going, "How do you like me now?"
Well, in fairness, the victory lap can only be a concrete thing if Thiago is like, Kenny was right.
No. See,
or if
Kenny was right now. It's not. No. In 6 weeks' time, it might not be accurate. Right now, actually, right now, this morning, and for the next 2 weeks, because there's no football that Thiago's going to be playing in of any relevance. Away you go.
The thing is that Thiago could then get into a bit of form next season and it'll blow back up.
No. He's gone from Twitter.
Thiago needs to admit that Kenny was right, come out and say it, or Thiago needs to retire from football and never play a game again. They're the only two options here. And then one final point on that is going back through all the old comments. My favourite part of all this was people saying, Kenny Cunningham, like this guy played for Birmingham. And those comments coming from people who probably never played professional football. It's like me saying Kenny Cunningham played for Birmingham, which I always find the team that you support is better than the team that the pundit played for. Therefore, you are more entitled to your opinion than that pundit by all accounts, which never makes any sense. But anyway, I'm sure he'll come back and passive-aggressively like all of those comments.
All right, a reminder to all our viewers on YouTube this morning, you can turn on your notifications, and every morning when we go live, you'll get a little ping on your phone to go, oh, the lads are live again, and you can just hit the button and it's very easy for you. But also the best thing to do is to subscribe to the OTB AM podcast on whichever podcast application you're using these days. But I know most of you by this stage are, of course, happily using the OTB Sports app, which you can get free, gratis and for nothing in the app stores. Our next piece is essentially a justification for us all wasting our lives watching sport, Eoin. Is that fundamentally why you brought this piece to us?
Oh, yeah. If you've been watching too much sport and people are giving out to you for watching too much sport, shrug them off. It is science, baby. That is what it's down to. And we have living proof, and it is published in a brand new book.
That new book is called Fans, How Watching Sports Makes Us Happier, Healthier and More Understanding. It's the new book from New York Times bestselling author Larry Ormsted. We got the chance to sit down with him to talk about the benefits of watching sport. Enjoy.
Okay, I am delighted to be joined by New York Times best-selling author Larry Ormsted, who's got a new book out. It's called Fans, How Watching Sports Makes Us Happier, Healthier and More Understanding. I'm delighted to welcome Larry to the show right now. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, Larry, this is absolutely fantastic news because all we have done for the second half of this pandemic is sit at home and watch game after game after game on our TV. So you are telling us that this has been a really good decision.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's probably even a better decision in the pandemic. You know, everybody needs a little mental health, a little bit of stress relief, a little bit of happiness and diversion. You know, a lot of the psychologists I talked to told me about how sports has traditionally been a source of diversion during, you know, times of unrest, whether it's war or after, you know, natural disasters. And this is sort of a unique one in that it affects everyone in the world.
That's a really interesting point. But if we get into the science, because this is a book based on science, it's not just randomized theory thrown out here. How does sport benefit us?
Well, probably the biggest thing at the personal level would fall under community. The psychologists have about 24 different mental health benefits attributed to being a sports fan. Things like lower rates of depression, higher self-esteem, larger social circles, and better connectivity to others. But I think most of those all come from this one underlying factor of community, which, you know, the sense of belonging to a group, a particular group of fans. I don't know if you guys use the term over there, but we've taken in the States to using whatever the name of the team is, fill in the blank nation, right? Red Sox Nation, Yankees Nation. in a way that you don't do for, say, Harry Potter or Star Wars fans, right? Sports is unique in a lot of ways because of that. And one of the big things is when you watch a game, pretty much whatever, whether it's your football or our football, you see tens of thousands of people in the stands, a lot of them wearing jerseys or colors or hats. And even though you think you're watching a sporting event, not a bunch of spectators, you can't help but see them. So even when you're home on your couch, you get this feeling that you're part of something bigger than yourself, which again, you don't get when you watch. I love Star Wars, but if I watch it on TV, I don't feel like I'm belonging to anything. And you see people in the supermarket, with a hat for your, rugby team or whatever it is. And there's this shared recognition. Bumper stickers is something in this country. People put a lot of sports team bumper stickers on their cars, and you drive around and you can't help but, if you're in New York, you're going to see Yankees logos. So again, in a way that other kinds of fandom don't really have. So there's this constant sense of community, and that belonging makes us happy.
Why is that? Why does that sense of belonging make us happy? And why is it something that we chase so desperately?
It's DNA. I mean, humans are innately tribal creatures, and going back, to the Stone Ages, people lived together in groups, and up until the Industrial Revolution, extended families, typically anywhere in the world, lived together under one roof. And people have always banded together to form villages, city-states, towns, nations. When we get the odd person who actually enjoys living alone in a cabin in the woods cut off from society, that's when we get what we call the Unabomber, in this country. So most people, it's human nature to crave a sense of tribal belonging, and sports fandom provides that in a way very, very few other things do. The only, thing really on a scale globally with it would be religion.
Sport has probably overtaken that in many elements of society at this point.
It has, because, when they poll people and they say, are you a sports fan? If you say yes, that pretty much is a guarantee you watch some sports. If they ask you if you're religious, it's certainly not a guarantee that you go to church or synagogue or the mosque, right? It just means, that you affiliate. And certainly, sports fans collectively are bigger, more people that belong to any single organized religion in the world.
And that's an interesting point that you make there about people who say that they are sports fans invariably watching sport, because I wonder if it's actually a cool thing to be a sports fan. I don't know. I've been a sports fan my entire life, so it's never really been a decision for me to get into sport. But you point to the fact that sports fans, when depicted in popular culture, for example, it's not a very flattering depiction that they tend to be labelled with, particularly in United States film and television. Is it a cool thing, I guess, from the outside looking in, from the standpoint of a non-sports fan, to be a sports fan?
It is not cool, and that is one of the reasons why I wrote this book, because I think people should take pride in being a sports fan, and it's not that people who are sports fans are embarrassed of it, but it's typically not what they put out there as their image, or the first thing, the way that they identify themselves. It's just something they are. And yeah, when I did a pretty deep dive, I looked at, every sitcom and every Hollywood movie that focused on sports fans, and the stereotype is almost universally negative. The person is always obese and always male. I mean, about almost half of sports fans are women, always drinking too much, and it gets worse from there. That's the good depiction of the sports fan. The bad one is psychotic. So I think and when I do talk to non-sports fans, a lot of them say, oh, it just seems like a waste of time watching, sports. But they don't say that if you say, I was reading, or I was listening to music, or I was, building model train sets. Whatever your hobby is, people who don't belong to it don't seem to perceive it as a waste of time in the way they often do with sports.
Because it's interesting, the book is, every chapter starts with a continuation of your dialogue with a person who's not so much a sports fan as you are. Why do you think people from that standpoint see sports as a waste of time?
I think because they don't do it themselves, and it can be. I mean, there's certainly in every group, there's people at the extremes, and there's certainly extreme sports fans who spend probably too much time watching sports and too much money on it. And that's one of the reasons why I don't consider myself a particularly avid sports fan, because I really only I watch NFL football, I watch some baseball, but what I consider the hardcore sports fans I know watch everything, and in this country too, college sports are really big, which I know they're not in Europe, but it's almost like a whole second set of professional leagues, right? Second football, second basketball. So people have, this is the one time of year in the country when things are a little bit slow in sports. The Super Bowl just went by, baseball hasn't started, the Masters isn't on. But other than maybe mid-March, March Madness is coming, what we call that, the NCAA basketball tournament. Other than that, it's around the clock available all the time. And so I can see why people think of a sports fan as someone hunkered down in front of their TV, but that's not really true. And I got to say, when I said before that people who describe themselves as sports fans watch sports, often so do people who don't describe themselves as sports fans, which is the perfect example of Dr. Christie in the book, who's a real person, a friend of mine. As soon as she got talking about the Chicago Bulls, she remembered that she watched sports.
Yeah, nostalgia can be a powerful tool when you throw it into the sports mix to sort of, hold on a minute, I actually do remember a certain moment in time as a result of sport being a thing that exists. From her perspective and from the perspective of people who perhaps aren't tribal when it comes to a team currently participating in sport, is there an acceptance sometimes that activity can be separated from sport, where somebody can appreciate that being active and participating in sport is positive for you, but they will also disassociate that from actually sitting down and watching a game on television?
Absolutely. And I think probably the biggest example of that would be something like the Olympics, where a lot of people who maybe don't watch sports at other times tune in, and you have the non-team sports. I think when most of us think about watching sports on TV, we're thinking about the major professional leagues, but there's also, in individual sports, there's obviously golf and tennis would be at the top of that probably, but, track and field, swimming, things like that are, not team sports. And in the Olympics, I think that the reason why a lot of non-fans tune in is because of the athleticism, and they appreciate that fitness and drive and training and desire that it goes into being the fastest man in the world or the fastest woman in the world. And that's one of the reasons why every Olympics, and it used to be every 4 years, but recently it's every 2 years, there's a rush afterwards to sign up for gym memberships and health clubs and get into shape. And that's people who are inspired by those examples they see on TV. And that's when I think, sports can have a transformative effect when you take a spectator who's otherwise sedentary and encourage them to suddenly become active. That's very good for them and for society.
And then the other way in which sport can go in terms of its really positive benefits is, I guess, the healing power of sport. And 9/11 is something that you cover in great detail in the book, and how New York at that time, how the United States at that time looked towards the first round of the MLB coming back, the first night of the NBA coming back, as this really, truly unifying moment in the weeks that had just preceded that moment. Could you talk us through that a little bit and how that was very much real rather than this idea of positivity that perhaps we might invent?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a long history. I mean, I talked to someone from the State Department who said, going back to ancient Greece, they would use the Olympics to end the ongoing cycle of violence and bring a period of peace, because you weren't allowed to have city-state wars during the Olympics. And it's always been this sort of historic calming effect. And after Pearl Harbor was bombed, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president, urged Major League Baseball not to cancel because he knew that the people needed a diversion to keep them from feeling terrified of being the first time we'd been attacked on our own, territory. And this comes up again and again, man-made and natural disasters. But 9/11 was especially high profile because 9/11 itself was so high profile in our country. But though the first game in New York, a Mets game after baseball resumed after about a week-long break, everyone I know in New York, whether they're a baseball fan or not, vividly remembers that game. And one of the fans I interviewed who was there said, that was the moment when it was okay to smile and laugh again, and that's pretty powerful stuff. And then that, just a few weeks later, the Yankees played in the World Series and hosted that also in New York, and President Bush threw out the first pitch. And, both of those games are immediately on the highlight reels of iconic baseball moments. And but people all over the country tuned in, and people all over the country, with the exception, they were playing the Braves. So with the exception of Atlanta Braves fans, everyone pretty much in the country was rooting for New York to win just because they needed the bounce back. And it's happened again and again since then. It happened with the Boston Marathon bombing. The Red Sox and sports really played a role in healing the city. And then we had this 1 October, which is the Las Vegas concert shooting, which is the largest mass shooting in American history. And I went out there after that and interviewed people who had been literally shot and also shot at and terrified. And right after that was when the city's first major professional sports team. Las Vegas is the largest city in the United States that didn't have a basketball, baseball, football, or hockey team. And they had just gotten their first hockey team, and the season started about 10 days after that shooting. And it had such an amazing healing effect on people. I talked to a woman who was afraid to go out of her house and finally went to a hockey game, and it basically, changed her life. So, it's hard when you talk to people like that and they tell you about being shot and then being saved spiritually and emotionally by hockey. It's hard to discount it and say, oh, it's just sports.
And I guess if you look at what's going on in the world right now, it's a little bit less linear, because there have been moments in the United States and here as well in Europe where there have been moments where fans have got back into stadiums. There have been more normal moments at times in the last 12 months than now feels normal, I guess, in certain places. Do you think that'll still happen, though, at the end of this, when people are vaccinated, when you have your first capacity stadium in the United States, for example, that people will say, right, it is okay to feel happy again, and sport will be the vehicle through which they feel that?
I absolutely feel that way, because when even now, at least, the games in this country that have had sports, it's very limited. Sometimes, 1/6, 1/8, 1/10 capacity. They just had the first Dallas NBA game with any fans had 1,100 people in an arena that, seats 30,000 people. But when you can go and sit shoulder to shoulder among 50,000 people with strangers and high five them in between plays without wearing masks, hopefully someday, that is really when you'll know that normalcy has returned to society.
For sure. It's something that we're all looking forward to say the least. Just a couple of other things I just wanted to ask you about, Larry, just to kind of come full circle on the idea of tribalism, and that is essentially where fandom comes from. The shared emotion that you have in a stadium, that has now been transported into an online space, it seems, predominantly. With that, are you seeing more toxicity when it comes to tribal fan groups? And it's not just tribal fan groups full stop, when it comes to them battening down the hatches, standing by their team, through good or through bad, supporting whatever characters may be on their team. And I guess then the poison that comes from them to opposition teams and fans at times.
Yes and no. It's really a double-edged sword here, because the rollout and prevalence of sports radio and online chat has made it much easier for people to express their toxic feelings and just make it easier to either be heard or feel like they're being heard. And certainly, we have second guessing team decisions, managerial decisions, particular plays is a big thing. As your team loses, people go on and on about what the coach should have done or did wrong. And that becomes a back and forth banter that makes, builds anger, but also keeps sports radio in business. But on the other side, the big game changer in the last few years has been the advent of fantasy sports, and it has grown very, very quickly. I don't know the stats for Europe. I know you do. You participate and you have it for soccer, but just in North America, just in the U.S. and Canada, about 60 million people currently regularly play fantasy sports, and that's a lot. It's about a third of all sports fans. And when you do that, you can no longer really maintain your tribal nature and be successful. You have to draft players from the other hated teams. So once you do that, it's hard to hate the player that you're rooting for to make your fantasy team win. And there have already been studies of this really softening that us versus them, and where I live in New England, which is Red Sox country. So it's very normal for people to say, oh, I hate the Yankees, I hate Yankee fans. But that's no longer the case when you have 2 or 3 members of the Yankees on your fantasy baseball team. And I talked, especially football fans, the rivalries in American football. I talked to a really avid fantasy sports player who's in several different leagues, and he was a Redskins fan. And he told me for years he couldn't draft anyone from the Dallas Cowboys because they're, the opponent, but he kept losing. So finally he asked you, and the NFL rolled out a thing here called the Red Zone channel, which is basically a special TV channel just for following fantasy sports plays. And it's incredibly popular. So that's the big, and I interviewed a lot of people who told me about their entire families sort of losing their traditional rivalry hatreds between certain teams because of fantasy sports. So I think that's a good thing.
That's really interesting because I play both fantasy sports in the United States and our fantasy Premier League here, for example. And it does seem that the US versions are always far more advanced. And I think it's just because the US got a bit of a head start. So as somebody who might have seen fantasy sports grow and grow, did you feel that the more information that was at the hands of the fantasy managers, so to speak, or the fantasy coaches, that it became more of an important thing in their lives, where they had more data, a more advanced game to be playing, for example, that their love of it and their attachment to it just increased as well?
Absolutely. And there's several other benefits I've seen from fantasy sports. I mean, one of it is the sort of the educational component, right? If you're to follow the statistics and follow the players and stay on top of it is a real mental engagement, like doing a crossword puzzle or something. I think it's good for our brains, but also the connectivity, the community I talked about. I know a lot of people who play in multiple fantasy sports leagues based on their affiliation. So they'll have one where they play all with people they went to college or university with, one where they play with, former coworkers from their last job, whatever it is. And especially now in the pandemic, this is an extension of social media, a way for people to stay connected, where in the old days they would have had to pick up the phone and call all these people. So it definitely has another layer of belonging and engagement. And then finally, there's a big family / multi-generational component. I know a lot of people who maybe co-manage their fantasy team with their 12-year-old son or daughter. And in a way, I see fantasy sports as replacing things like Monopoly or Scrabble around the kitchen table. They're drafting, they're reading the paper, they're discussing it, they bust out the laptop, and I think it's a good way for families to engage.
And the thing is, a 12-year-old kid is probably beating their mom or dad at this point when it comes to fantasy sports. I like that. I like that note to leave it on, Larry. You're basically telling us that if you support a team and one of your fantasy Premier League players is playing against your team, it is totally okay and scientifically proven to root a little bit against your team for the benefit of your own fantasy football team. That's a positive note to leave it on.
Well, thank you. And yeah, I think anything that makes us kinder, gentler sports fans is good.
For sure. I should mention as well, sportsfansbook.com is where you can check out more about this book. It's called Fans, How Watching Sports Makes Us Happier, Healthier and More Understanding. We have barely scratched the tip of the iceberg here, so go check it out for more on it. Larry Ormsted, who I understand is a Ballyliffin golf course regular as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right. I think fantasy, Eoin, is going to be one of the big breakthroughs in the GAA when we move to a 8-team, 4-division league-based championship. It's going to be this massive explosion because there'll be an official data supplier. There'll be the ability to compare and contrast different players. There'll be drafts where you're able to pick. And I think that's one of the big sleeping giants that they're sitting on.
And the video game. Those two things are the ones that the GAA probably can use to absolutely explode when it comes to its own popularity. Like, I think that it's impossible to have a good fantasy game around Gaelic games at the moment, obviously, because it's a championship and it just doesn't work. Like there are games that exist, but they just don't have the popularity. I think as well that there's a next generation explosion that's about to happen in Fantasy Premier League as well. I don't think that game is anywhere near its final form, especially when you compare it to Fantasy NFL and how analytics driven it is, how mini league driven it is, and how Fantasy Premier League is basically based on your goals and your assists and your clean sheets, and that's it. It seems like a very okay, there is a few other things, but it seems like a very basic version of what the NFL can be and what the Premier League could be. So I think the GAA is probably starting from scratch, but I still think even with 8 million players playing the official Fantasy Premier League game at the moment. That still has room to grow.
Yeah, all right, good stuff. That was really interesting, I mean, it'd be interesting to hear what he thinks of Ballyliffin, but we might get him on again at some point for that. OTB AM live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. A busy one today on OTB Sports Radio with plenty to whet the Cheltenham appetite at 10:30. We're live on all of our social channels and live on OTB Sports Radio. At 1 o'clock, it's OTB Gold, James McLean with Nathan Murphy. The Saturday panel is our Cheltenham special before that'll actually be in the midst of the actual racing itself. Dadcast at 3. Our Legends interview is Matt Holland at 4. And OTB Gold, Joe Malloy meets Ruby Walsh. It's racing themed today. We're back from 7:30 tomorrow. Subscribe to the OTB AM podcast. It's in your podcast app by 10 o'clock every morning. Search OTB AM wherever you get your pods and give us a 5-star rating. That'd be nice. Let's play out today with Monday Night Rugby. It is Niamh Briggs and Keith Wood.
You're welcome along. So let's look at Six Nations round 4. Wales alone remain the only unbeaten side in the championship. 7 tries in Rome. Italy, pretty terrible to be honest. The Welsh head to Paris Saturday night with Grand Slam ambitions. The French were undone, of course, at Twickenham. Maro Itoje conjured up the match-winning try. And, of course, Ireland 27, Scotland 24 at Murrayfield, from 14 points up to 24 points apiece and in big trouble. And then Johnny Sexton did his thing. The news this afternoon is that James Ryan and Gary Ringrose are both out of the England game. Peter O'Mahony once again available for selection. And we should mention, away from the international spotlight, Joey Carbery's return continues to gather pace. Very good performance by all accounts in his first start for Munster since his return. They beat the Scarlets 28 points to 10. Now, to discuss all of that, former Irish internationals Keith Wood and Niamh Briggs. Hello, Niamh.
Hi, how are you?
Mr. Wood, hello.
Hello, Joseph. How are you?
Very well. So I suspect for the coach and probably the watching public as well, the win was more relief, the way it all transpired, as opposed to absolute ecstasy, but not for the first time. Johnny Sexton.
No, I think so. I think Johnny thought he played pretty well for the game. He was in control of the game, actually. I still feel we kicked far too much ball away, and I still feel it's hard looking at the game in terms of performance, especially having watched the truly spectacular game that we had on the previous day. And I'm definitely not talking about Wales-Italy. So, look, we got the win, but we should have won that game by 40 or 20 points. I thought we had so much control of so much of the game, possession, territory, everything. And we just, we won. So it's hard to criticise, but it wasn't the most enjoyable game of rugby to watch.
Niamh, Keith maybe captures what I'm sensing is the prevailing mood, which is we won, quickly followed by a but.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought there was lots of intent in how they went about, especially in the first half. I thought as the game wore on, the momentum kind of shifted, and then we kind of went into not really panic mode, but a little bit of panic mode. And I thought 50, 60 minutes I was screaming at television to bring Conor Murray on. I thought he would have brought a little bit more of composure around. But I did think that they played well in patches. They tried things, looked to move the point of contact, and so I was really excited about that. I think it's a funny game, when momentum shifts and teams are on the up, it's really hard to try and grab that momentum back. And I thought Ireland did really well to grab it back for the last 5 minutes.
Yeah, you can't forget in that first half, they are looking, Niamh, to do a few different things, and you talked there about move the point of contact and try a few little extra bits and bobs. Like we are seeing that. It's maybe not resulting in an amazing try or some big massive gain that we all remember afterwards, so it's probably not registering as much. I mean, you're kind of hoping that's coming, but on the evidence of the first 4 games of this championship, not there yet.
No, it's not, but I felt at half-time in that match that Ireland were just a small margin away from clicking, and if they could click, then they could have really opened up the Scotland team. I thought that's how close I felt that they were. I think we regressed back a little bit, as it's a bit like soccer, when especially when Jose's teams get a 1-0 lead, they sit back and invite teams on. I thought we did that a little bit, especially once Scotland scored their first try in the second half. We invited them onto us as opposed to going after the game again. We were happy enough to box kick. Like, James Gibson Park kicked the ball 15 times. And we spoke before the game about if that was going to be the tactic, then, you know, it was really hard to see why he would start over Murray in that sense, because Murray's box kicking is probably one of the most effective, accurate box kicks in the world. So I think that from that point of view, it's very frustrating. And then also, you know, we go 27-24 up, 2.5-3 minutes left, and we kicked the ball back to them 3 times.
Yeah.
You know, a team, you don't have confidence in yourself, I feel, or we were too panicky to hold on to the ball for 60, 70, 80 seconds. Keith's time playing with Munster, they were able to hold on to the ball for 10 or 12 minutes if they got a lead towards the end of the game. They were brilliant at tucking it up the jumper, but we were happy enough to... that was probably a little bit more of what we were seeing in terms of we took a brilliant lead, lost momentum, and then we just didn't have the confidence really to go after it.
Yeah. On the kicking, Keith, you suspect the reason they kept doing it is because they got a lot of joy out of it. You know, I mean, I don't, by the way, Neve's point on the final few moments when they were 3 points up and kept kicking away possession, that was bizarre. I agree on that. But for a lot of the game, when they kicked the ball, they were getting huge joy. I mean, Keith Earls had some big moments, Robbie Henshaw, they were, you know, making 10, 20 metres quite often. So I guess the old adage in rugby, if something's working for you, just keep doing it.
Yeah, I even felt at one stage when the cross kick went for the try, I said, we're going to kick the ball constantly now, because if it works, you know. Yeah. And look, we've had this conversation ad nauseum. It isn't about saying that that's the wrong thing to do or a bad thing to do. It just has to be part of a wider plan. And for me, when we're under pressure, we rely on that again and again and again and again. And it got us to a point where we won a game, so that's fantastic. We should have been home and hosed at that stage. And you could pick that up in the frustration from Johnny Sexton when he talked about it afterwards. He said, 14 points up and we're still having to eke out, an incredible kick from the touchline for us to win. So, look, we started on the negative, which I'm kind of annoyed with for that too, because we did so much right. Our turnovers were incredible. Some of the movement, well, there's been a few memes and a few funny things about Tyg Furlong with his dancing feet, Nijinsky on a bad day almost, but he was great. Our line-out was magnificent. It absolutely destroyed the Scottish line-out. So, we are doing an awful lot well, and the pack did a lot well. We're lacking that buzz. So when I say Johnny managed the game, he absolutely managed the game. We just need to do more. Whether that is attack the gain line far more, or incorporate players from the wing or fullback more, of different receivers, and we did different receivers at different times in that. But I thought we were in control and weren't getting the scores in the first half, and when it got to the second half, I don't know. I don't know. So when we say, kicks great, can you think of an international winger that decides that he's playing rugby and all he's doing is chasing a ball that's kicked in the air all day? I think it has to be more than that. So the criticism that I would have on this Irish team, I would have had on the English team, that an awful lot of it was blunt and too much kicking. So it can change, because England changed and some of their passing was just out of the top drawer, and it was different, and their kicking was kicking to try and win it back. And they did kick, England did kick as well, and they got a good bit of it back, but they just didn't kick as much as we were kicking. And it was a different type. So, but they seemed to say, okay, we need to have a big change in how we're playing, because it was like a different sport to the manner in which they've played earlier on in the season. So it's what do we do then in 5 days' time? What do we continue just to keep kicking? That's not progress. If people say it's progress, it's not.
No, it's true. And to be fair, you take the 2 tries, so the kick for Earls and then the pick and go inside the 22 for the Tygburn try. You don't really feel like that's the blueprint to get over the line against a better side. England, for instance, this Saturday. You don't really look at the Irish attack and say, right, it's now stepped forward a couple of notches and is ready to take on England. That, I suppose, is the worry. And Shane Jennings was alongside me in Virgin Studio watching the match, and he picked out numerous occasions where he said hit pause now, and there's massive overlaps outside, or there's numbers out wide, and we're electing not to take those overlaps. We played a few of the clips after the game, and it was, you know, similar story after the French game, that stolen line out in midfield and box kick from the halfway line, effectively from Billy Burns straight from the off, and a big overlap outside. So that area of the game is not improving. They're still, for whatever reason, be it they're adjusting to this heads up business, or the plan is very rigidly to kick. Not sure which one it is, maybe a mixture of the two. But whatever the reason, they're still not improving in that regard. They're not taking those overlaps out wide.
No, absolutely. And I think what frustrated me a small bit the other day is every time we turn the ball over and we get it back into our possession, there's almost like this frantic quick get rid of it or kick it as quickly as possible, as opposed to let's just set it up, have a look up, see where the space is. And more often than not, if you get a turnover ball, the defence that's turned it over will start to crab in, because they just think, oh my God, let's just, you know, they gravitate towards the ball, and the space is outside. But we can't seem to, we either try and force things that, you know, another knock on, or we lose the ball, or we kick it away. And I can't understand how, for a team that can win so many turnovers, James Ryan, TJ Stander, Tyke Byrne, Robbie Henshaw, they're really good players on the ground, and we get a lot of turnovers, especially off line out as well. The other days was brilliant. Do they not work at it in training? Do they not turn around and say, okay, let's play a couple of phases, blow every time a whistle's blown, it's turnover ball, and let's play what's in front? It seems to me like they don't, because that's the one area since they've started this tournament, even back to Autumn Nations Cup time, that we haven't improved at all. We just do not look like we have any plan. We don't look like, and Keith will tell you, the old kind of saying that when you got a turnover with club rugby was just move it two pass rule, get it away from the contact. We don't even seem to have any sort of pattern or for, you know, or understanding about where the ball can play. It's literally just get it, and whoever has it kicks it. Like for Finn Russell's try, the minute we turned the ball over, Gary Ringrose tried to kick it, when realistically the space wasn't there to kick it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that for me is probably a big frustration point. But I thought the other day, especially in the first half, when they attacked the ball off phase play, they tried loads of little movement to point contact, little tip-ons from the forwards, little passes out the back, switch plays that they tried didn't come off all the time, but at least they tried them. And so I definitely saw positive movements in that area. But we're brilliant at turning ball over, and yet we don't seem to punish teams like other teams will punish us.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Keith, I wonder, where does skill set come into this? You know, are we overestimating in certain quarters the capabilities of the team? You see when Sexton gets his hands on the ball, there's a bit of quality. You see when Tyke Furlong gets his hands on the ball, there's just a noticeable upping of the quality or the pace on things. Or, you know, Tyke Byrne, in fairness to him, has come in and shows great hands. And then, look, there are chinks in that chain. Think of dancing Furlong, as you mentioned, and then it goes to Stander and he tries this loopy pass out wide that hits the ground. And, you know, there's probably limitations there as well, we have to be frank about.
Well, look, if there are limitations, you have to, like, the self-awareness is understanding them. You know, that's part of it. I'm working on it in training, so I don't think there's anything wrong in having different players in the forwards who are pivot players, who interest the opposition, are still able to pass out the back or offload or whatever it is, and there's some who aren't. So the ones who aren't, you make certain that they tuck their head down and go into contact, or maybe not have themselves in that position.
But isn't that a limiting point then, though? So say Stander there where there was something on, and like he's 50 caps into his Ireland career, and it's just accepted that he's not a good passer. I mean, you'd be working on that every day, surely.
Well, I think you would, but also I'd be saying you pass it to the guy next to you, and suddenly the missed 3 pass doesn't dribble on the ground, and you've people in a line. For me, I thought the pass wasn't great, but I also thought there was nobody putting their hands up for it. So there was about 3 guys in a line or a bit of a loop. It wasn't as it wasn't as simple as cut out as that. So sometimes it can just be put the ball to the guy next to you. You know, do the skills that you have. So when you're under pressure, do the skills that you know work. And you work all the time then in training to change that level, to make it a higher level. That's what training is for, is so that when the pressure comes on, you're actually able to do certain bits of skills. So I do see there's elements of that, and I do see that some of our players are able to do it. And I actually, it's funny, when you look at the game with George Ford playing on the previous day, and I'm a big fan of George Ford as an out half, because he's small and his passing is just flat, and he's attacking the line, and yet he's still pulling it. There's some of the passes for the English scores were 15, 20 metre passes. It's a joy, and so there's criticism there. There also was Robbie Henshaw, who was on fire. I think Hugo Keenan is doing really, really well at full back. I don't know him. I've never met him, but he's one of the guys that since he's come onto the scene, he seems comfortable. It doesn't mean he's perfect. He's an awful lot to work on, but there's a sense of comfort having him back there. He seems to be in the right place at the right time, nearly all the time.
And to go back to your standard point, I accept what you're saying about Keenan and Henshaw, and there's lots of positives there as well. So that's a fair point you make on standard. Not everyone's going to have, going to be DuPont in disguise. But so it's interesting you're saying, one, his decision-making there was questionable and the shape around him wasn't so good. Because, for me, to hone in on a moment and try and extrapolate something bigger, if you're thinking of what France would have done at Twickenham. So say their tight head prop could dance like Furlong and create that bit of, there's something on here, let's go. That we don't take advantage of that situation, be it Standard's decision, be it the execution of the pass, be it the shape around him. That for me, if you were Mike Catt, you'd spend 10, 20 minutes on that in the meeting room and be talking about what needs to happen there and what's not happening there. Because I just know when you watch France and something like that happens, they're all alive to it somehow. You use the word buzz. That was a perfect moment where there should have been real buzz about Ireland there, and ball hits the ground and on we go,
Well, I think that's valid, and I also think that I think Raj said it on over the weekend that that the confidence to try things, it was all very prescriptive before, and the confidence to make that change takes a period of time. So at some stage you have to say, lads, we're going to have a cut. Maybe it isn't in a Six Nations game, maybe it is, but we're going to have a cut, we're going to chance different things, but we want everybody running with a positive line. So on that line, CJ drifted across the field a little, so did the rest of the guys outside him. That's one of those guaranteed balls that's always going to hit the ground. There was nobody picking a line off it and having a cut. And that's something we need to do. I mean, we need to be running onto the ball. It's the confidence of going at full tilt, catching a ball. It doesn't matter what your defensive line does. That straightens them up too. That stops them drifting. It gets you over the gain line. So, look, they're all little bits and bobs. For me, Furlong, having been out injured for so long, fighting his way back into match fitness, it was just great to see him play.
No, it's brilliant. He's the real deal, isn't he? He can do everything. Niamh, the other big positive you would have to take from yesterday, and it was evident in the first match in Wales, it was evident against France, and again yesterday, there is a team spirit about this group. I'm not saying previous groups haven't had it, but there is, they are really in this together. There's a commitment about things. You get the sense, whatever about confidence, put that to one side for a second, but psychologically as a group, they're in a very committed, good place together. You sense a lot of unity in that group at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Johnny spoke about it in his interview afterwards that, or maybe it was Andy Farrell, I'm not sure, but, when you go 14 points up and with 5 or 6 minutes to go, the opposition level it, it's a really difficult conversation to have underneath the posts. But, the ability to turn around and say, right, we're going left, someone's got to smash and someone's got to try and get in over it. We can do this. You could see it, it was a brilliant effort by Ryan Baird to get up, and a brilliant steal by Henderson to have that knowledge or discipline. Not like most players would have just saw kind of red in terms of ball on the player on the ground, let's just jump in and get it, and jump in on top of them, and then it's a penalty against you. But to have the understanding to just hold his feet a small bit, get in over the ball, and sure, when he's brilliant at that, so there was going to be no moving him. So I think from that perspective, they literally went and won the game twice. And that'll be a huge, big confidence. That's 2 wins on the bounce now for them. And, you know, after the first couple of weeks where they'll, you know, kept talking about in the media saying, oh, look, we're all together, you know, we've been unlucky. That can only kind of go on for so long, and you could really feel that they went out together yesterday, especially in those last few minutes, and made things work. Even though we were all screaming at the television for the box kicks for the last 2 minutes, they all seemed to be very much on the same page, that it was okay to do it. They were buying into it. They were all chasing it. They were putting Scotland under pressure. I thought for the last 60 seconds, they were really disciplined. Nobody jumped into a ruck. They just tackled, got up off the ground, filled the field, made it really difficult for Scotland to have a broken field type of scenario that they would have wanted. So from that perspective, 100%, they'll take great confidence from that, knowing that some of the things that happened the weekend, they can be easily fixed for 5 days' time.
Yeah, Keith, you've been in lots of team environments, obviously. I suspect on the outside, when a performance has deficiencies, like a lot of performances will, but on the inside, you've come through a really kind of tough roller coaster like that and grounded out and got the win in the end. We can probably underestimate on the outside what that does for a group inside. Like, there's a degree of probably looking around each other saying, okay, this is something we can really build on now, and maybe you can kick on. That's the hope.
I think that's entirely true, and we're giving a view from the outside, and we're looking at it as fans now that we are, but the team will say, oh my God, we got a really good win against Italy, who were rubbish. We've eked out a win here when we could have lost it away from home. Things haven't been great, but my God, it's a damn sight better. Lost 2-1-2. It could have been maybe lost 3-1-1, and that would make it very ugly. And they go in for a chance to a game that they don't ever have any issue getting up for. And I know that sounds like an odd view, but you know, when you're playing a team like England, who are, you know, very confident, very capable, your game is raised. It's a huge game, but much and all, as people say, it's not any bigger than the other games. You know that there is a big sense of that there is. So they have to raise the game, and they will raise it emotionally to make certain that they're at a higher pitch. For me, I think it's hard to really sustain a game when you kick away the ball so much, even if you win it back. It's just there's a 50-50 chance you're not going to get it back all the time, and you've guys running up and down the field for half the day. So I don't know, I was stunned by the change in England. I thought they made good changes on the field, but I thought Ben Young's played the best game I've seen him play in about 5 or 6 years for England. I know, but so we have to get our head around that fact. Are we going to be able to close them down far more than France? And yes, we are. And where's our confidence going to be at? Are we going to do something more with the ball? Because I don't know if we can get away with it against England.
No, and look, that is the worry. I mean, the attack is still not humming, for all that we're kind of accentuating a positive or two. So let's talk defence then, Niamh, because look, if my cat's been under scrutiny over the last while, I think Guy Easterby increasingly probably will be scratching his head at Simon, excuse me. I thought it was, is it not Guy?
Guys with Leinster.
Sorry. Guy, I apologise profusely. Simon, we're coming for you. But Simon Easterby might be kind of having a few questions to answer in some ways. We'll come to the 2 tries. I mean, there's mistakes in them, but just in general terms, if you picture, because Alan Quinlan talked about this with Ger and Eoin on OTB AM this morning, if you remember when Robbie Henshaw, who, as you rightly said, Keith, is in brilliant form, sprinted back diagonally the length of the pitch to push, I think it was Van der Merwe out over the sideline, and there was kind of chest to chest and all that stuff as well. Alan Quinn was making the point that really Scotland there went from their own 22 that far up the pitch without really beating a man, that actually Ireland are incredibly soft in defence, especially in that last quarter, often backsides facing the touchline, as opposed to so many defences which are up and putting an opposition under pressure. He feels the Irish defence generally, I mean, we will come to the tries, but generally is almost more important, are just way too soft at the moment, way too pleasant to play against.
Yeah, I thought there were definitely moments for that Scottish match that it was hips to touchline and we were conceding space and almost trying to get Scotland to to the side of the pitch or the edge so that we could use the touchline to help us out, I thought.
And giving up too many yards and metres doing that?
Yeah, I thought at times they were right to do it, and then other times they could have put pressure on. And I think a little bit of that had to do with fear, because Scotland are so good at taking to the line and pushing the pass out the back, taking to the line and pushing pass out the back, and then before you know it, they're up in the 15 to the touchline, and you might only have 2 defenders against 3 players, because there are quite, Finn Russell's very good at controlling that. Stuart Hogg's excellent to coming onto that. So I'd say there might have been a little bit of fear. I think the first time that Scotland got a good attack, they went down James Lowe's wing and got a bit of change out of it. And if I'm correct, I was trying to watch as much as I could afterwards, but Hugo Keenan seemed to be covering James Lowe a lot. So he was in and around that side of the pitch, which meant that Keith Earls then couldn't go hard, because he was trying to keep, if he went hard and they got it over him, then, it was almost going to be a guaranteed try, because Keenan's the space that he had to make up was too much, or to the fact that, Gibson Park might have been in the line. I need to go back and watch it, but on my initial viewing, that's exactly what I thought. I thought Keenan seemed to be taking the last man on James Lowe wing quite a lot, or hanging in and around that 13 channel behind us, and then it left the other side exposed quite a bit. And at that stage then, when things happen and forwards get sucked in, you can't then push off the line, because 2 passes and they're on the outside and you're conceding a lot more space. But I thought, though, in the first couple of matches, Ireland actually got off the line very well. Thought they were very square. So I think it might have just been a fear factor, maybe, because Scotland are so dangerous at that type of game.
I thought it was conscious, Joe. I thought it was a conscious change from... we tend to blitz quite a lot, and in the past, when we play against teams that play a very fast or complicated system, we become very narrow, and we weren't narrow. So you lose ground, but you still make the tackle, and I think that works for a lot. I don't like the hips being turned as much, and I don't like it to be that passive, and I felt we got too passive. But on that drift, you just have to make the tackle, and that's the issue. That was the issue for that. It wasn't that hard up on that side. I think there was a bit of a scramble to it, but the tackle has to be made.
You're talking about the Hugh Jones try here. Yeah. So I mean, like, what do you say here with James Lowe? Because there's now a few blips, and nobody's suggesting, geez, you write him off at test level, but clearly the jump or the demands at Pro 14 or European level are very different to test level. I mean, let's go short term. With a view to England, can you start him with any confidence if you're Andy Farrell now?
I don't think so. And again, let's not write him off, because he's too good a runner and too good a player, and has proven that over the last few years with Leinster. This is a significant step up, and this is, you're trying to not learn your trade, but you get exposed at this level. If there's a glitch, let's everybody attack the glitch. There's no humanitarianism here. Like, if he has got a weakness, you gut him as soon as you possibly can, and you know he'll be targeted. And so that has to be about getting that understanding to a higher level. I think he'd be exposed on it this weekend. So for me, no, I wouldn't. But I would be saying he's got too much quality for us to get rid of. So we need to maximise the amount of time he has in this system, understanding what is expected at him at this level. And Brian O'Driscoll was on a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about his technique was very grabbing. Well, it can't be. He has to tackle properly. Even for that particular try on yesterday, his body position was too high. He wasn't in the position to make a tackle. He just wasn't in the right place to do it. So, and I also think it's, look, us having this conversation, so we're asked our opinion. This is hard stuff. You know, his appraisal is in public. This is tough. And even though he's not a young guy, he's a young international. So there's an awful lot of learning still there for him. And I don't know that I'd want that exposed against England.
Yeah, and it is tough for him, and I think you knew when he threw the ball out over the touchline a few moments later that, you know, he was probably in a tough spot, and you hope he recovers from it. The first try, Niamh, So once Ringrose kicks the ball, and I think the consensus is it wasn't the right thing to do at that moment, then it's just kind of comedy of error stuff. I'm not sure, like, what analysis can you make from that point on?
Yeah, look, I think if you're probably trying to find one work on from it, I think it was the lack of reaction or energy to try and claim the ball back. I think we speak about energy on the ball, but you have to match that energy on the ball to have an energy off it. And I think that we didn't do that. We were quite passive. We didn't look to clean up any, the mistake. We didn't. We looked just very passive, and unfortunately, James always coming into that, and there was, we just seemed to. We spoke about it before, in terms of the attack, about us being reactive as opposed to or proactive. I think when you're in that position, in that danger zone, you've got to be thinking possible scenarios here. And the box kick get blocked down, but it's the next phase after that you have to be very wary of. And Ireland just weren't able to counteract that. They weren't able to get speed of thought. They weren't able to have that burst of energy. And it's exactly similar to the point that Keith made earlier on in terms of when Tadhg Furlong's dancing feet put CJ into space. We hadn't the energy to get onto the ball, and we didn't have the energy to get the ball back for that try. And I think that's a pretty worrying thing.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, put your best face forward with our new and improved razor.